Chapter 682. When the little girl heard Christina's words, she said in surprise and regret, "Goodbye. What's wrong?" Christina glanced at Eric and said, "The Mickey Mouse Club has been disbanded. Mom plans to bring me back to Pennsylvania to attend high school." "Oh, that's too bad." The little girl hugged Christina again. After letting go of the girl, she held Christina's little hand and said, "You can come and play with me any time when you're in Los Angeles." "Well, it's too late now. I'll get Natasha to send you home." Christina was immediately stunned. She had been waiting in front of the little girl's house for many days. It was not easy for her to finally see the little girl. She did not even have the chance to say anything before she was asked to leave. When she saw one of the identical twins open the car door after hearing Drew's words, Christina was at a loss. She looked around frantically and looked at Eric pitifully. Since the merger with ABC, Firefly had been adjusting its TV business. However, for trivial matters such as the axing of some low-rated TV programs, unless Eric specifically requested, the relevant documents were often sent to his assistant's office to be classified and archived. After all, Firefly's TV business system had dozens of new programs eliminated every year. If he had not suddenly seen Christina, Eric would not have cared about these things. Seeing the girl who was about to be rudely chased away by the little girl looking at him pitifully, Eric shook his head helplessly. Although it was a little unreasonable for the little girl to do this, Eric knew that she was trying to protect him. However, Eric did not feel that some things needed to be overly cautious. He reached out and gently knocked the little girl's head. He smiled and said, "Stop joking around. Let Christina stay for dinner." "Wow, okay. The little girl rubbed her head and pouted unhappily. She got into the car and instructed the twins to open the door and drive the car in. Eric did not get into the car again. He waved at Christina, who was at a loss, and walked into the mansion with the little girl. 2 years ago, after the Jackson case broke out, Christina felt that Drew's attitude toward them had suddenly turned cold. Before that, Drew would often invite them to his house to play and occasionally bring them to some interesting parties. However, after that incident, all of that suddenly disappeared. Drew did not contact them again. Christina would occasionally bring Brittany to visit with her, but Drew's attitude toward them was no longer as warm. As for Eric, whom Christina had always wanted to see, she had not seen him even once after that incident. Christina originally did not have much hope in maintaining her relationship with Drew. However, the sudden disbandment of the Mickey Mouse Club forced her to take the initiative to look for Drew, hoping to get some help from him. Drew's whereabouts were a little erratic. Christina had been waiting outside Drew's mansion in Trousdale Manor for more than a week. Fortunately, she finally saw him, and she was even luckier to bump into Eric. Following beside Eric, Christina did not know what to say as she glanced at the man's silhouette from the corner of her eyes. She could only carefully look at the scenery of the mansion that she had not set foot in for a long time. She could not help but fantasize about when she could own a house like this. "You want to stay in Los Angeles?" The sudden voice startled Christina, but she quickly calmed down. She looked up at Eric and nodded honestly. "Yes, I don't want to go back to Pennsylvania to study. I like singing." Eric looked at the hopeful little face and said, "But you're still too young. You're not even 15 yet, right?" A hint of sadness flashed in Christina's eyes. She knew that her age was the biggest limitation she encountered now, but the girl still tried her best to defend herself. "Mr. Williams, I could sing Mariah Carey's Vision of Love when I was 10 years old. Back then, they said that I could sing as well as she could." Although Eric had never heard of Vision of Love, he knew that Mariah Carey was famous for her difficult dolphin voice. However, he also knew that the young girl in front of him could sing as well as Mariah Carey. "Christina, it's useless to have good singing skills. You're still underage. There won't be any record companies that will sign you." Christina's face suddenly turned gloomy. She could not help but think that it would be great if the Mickey Mouse Club could continue for another 2 years. When she turned 16, it would be easier for her to get a contract with some record companies. Christina turned to look at Eric, but she did not say what was on her mind. She knew that it would be useless even if she said it. The two of them walked to the door of the villa. Eric pushed the door open and let the girl in. The twins were already busy in the kitchen. The little girl's coat was hanging on the clothes rack. It seemed that she had gone to take a shower. Eric took a box of juice from the fridge and handed it to Christina, who was sitting on the sofa. He asked, "Justina, are Brittany and the rest still in Los Angeles?" Christina shook her head. "I'm not too sure." The boys and girls in the Mickey Mouse Club had always been two distinct groups. The relationship between the girls was not that good. After the show stopped recording, they did not have much contact with each other. Eric sat down on the sofa and grunted when he heard this, but he was thinking about the matter at hand. Although the European and American music scene had always been in a state of blooming flowers, every period had its own genre. From the mid-90s to the early years of the new century, the most eye-catching genre in the European and American music scene was teen pop. The main representatives of this genre were the famous Backstreet Boys and Britney Spears. Christina also walked the teen pop route in the early stages of her career. Justin Timberlake also joined the teen pop group in the beginning. Now, Firefly Group had just completed the integration of its music resources and formed Firefly Records. However, with the advent of the Internet era, the decline of the recording industry caused by the spread of online music was close at hand. Firefly Records was destined to never reach the heights of Warner Records, Universal Records, and Columbia Records. Under such circumstances, it was obviously not worth it for Firefly Records to spend a lot of resources on every genre of music like the traditional record industry giants. The best way out was to focus on packaging and cultivating a certain type of singer. And in the last decade before the decline of the recording industry, the most popular genre of music would undoubtedly be teen pop. In his memory, Disney's recording industry had always been lukewarm. Britney, Christina, Justin Timberlake, and even Vanessa Hudgens, Miley Cyrus, Selena Gomez, and others who debuted from the Disney Channel were all recruited by other major record companies. This was undoubtedly a big loss for Disney. After all, the reason why these people could become famous so quickly was inseparable from the Disney Channel's cultivation. Christina saw that Eric was deep in thought and did not dare to take the initiative to disturb him. She sipped the juice in her hand. After a while, Eric raised his head and said to Christina, "How about this, Christina? You stay in Los Angeles for the time being. Someone will contact you when the time comes." Christina looked at Eric in surprise. "Mr. Williams, you mean, I can continue to sing?" Eric smiled and nodded. "Of course, but you definitely won't be able to release a record in the next few years. I'll get someone to arrange some suitable opportunities for you to appear in movies or TV series to maintain your popularity." In English, "you" and "you" were the same word. Of course, Christina could not tell that Eric used the plural. She thought that this was completely preferential treatment from Eric. The girl was overjoyed and pursed her lips. She raised her head and carefully looked around. She mustered up the courage to get up and move closer to Eric. Her face was slightly red as she whispered, "Mr. Williams, I can stay tonight. I just need to call Mom and tell her that I'm staying over at Drew's place." Eric raised his eyebrows and smiled. "What do you plan to do?" Christina's face turned even redder, but she mustered up the courage to look at Eric boldly and said, "I'll do whatever you want me to do." Eric smiled and reached out to pinch the girl's face. "Don't let your imagination run wild. I'm not interested in a little girl like you." Christina subconsciously shrank back and said, "You're lying. You obviously like me very much." "Oh, you." "When you were with Drew, she was even younger than me." Eric raised his chin towards Christina's back and smiled. "You're mistaken. I was forced to do it." Christina blinked in confusion and realized something. She quickly turned her head and happened to see the little girl in a bathrobe looking at her with a smile. After dinner, Eric instructed Natasha to drive Christina back. Watching the car drive out of the mansion's gate, the little girl standing beside Eric took the few cassettes of songs that Christina gave to Eric before she left. She weighed them in her hands and said, "Eric, you have to be careful. The Chandler family extorted more than $20 million from Jackson. Now, the family is living in a mansion in Manhattan. They don't have to work for the rest of their lives. I think if someone extorts you once, their children and grandchildren won't have to worry about food and clothing for the next few generations. My money isn't that easy to extort. Besides, there are so many things like this in the industry. How many people can expose it? In the past few years, the only case that got blown up was Jackson, and he was wrongly accused. Eric smiled, but there was a hint of sarcasm in his expression. Christina originally wanted to ask Drew to help pass some of the song samples she recorded to some of the record company's executives. After getting a promise from Eric, the girl left a few cassettes behind before she left. Back in the mansion, Eric casually stuffed a cassette into the player. Christina's cover of Foo was immediately heard. Compared to the original version and the Victoria's Secret show version in his memory, the girl's singing was even more shocking. The little girl hugged a pillow and went to Eric, who was typing on his laptop. She said, "Christina's singing is really good, but I think it's hard for her to find her own niche. She's more suitable for the development of high-pitched female singers like Whitney Houston and Mariah Carey, but she's too short." Hee hee. The little girl was obviously just saying it casually, but she hit the nail on the head. In his memory, although height had nothing to do with Christina's height, it was true that she had never found a suitable development path for her music. At first, she was on the teen pop path. Although her first album sold more than 10 million copies, Britney's strong rise and Christina's consecutive teen pop failures made her try to change her style. After that, she never found a suitable niche. However, Eric pointed at the song Foo that was playing from the radio and said, "Isn't this Kristen's musical style?" Eric had already decided to let Britney and Christina walk on the original teen pop path. However, compared to Britney's sweet girl next door image, Christina could walk on the path of a slightly rebellious independent girl in order to distinguish herself from Britney. Since a lot of boy groups could exist in the original space-time at the same time, as long as they were separated, it wouldn't be a problem to accommodate two teen pop queens with different styles at the same time. After spending a few hours organizing the information and ideas about teen pop in his memory, Eric sent them to the work email in his assistant's office. He told Kelly to add the topic to tomorrow's regular meeting. Then, he turned off his laptop and picked up the little girl who was sleeping soundly beside him to rest. The next day, at the regular meeting of the executives, after discussing in detail the topic of gradually reducing the scale of Firefly's film production in the next few years, Eric raised the question of the development direction of Firefly Records. After the original ABC and Disney's music resources were integrated, Firefly Records was in a critical period of development. The songs released by Eric during the Victoria's Secret show were amazingly successful, and it was easy for the management to accept Eric's suggestion to make full use of Firefly's advantages to take the lead in packaging a batch of teen pop singers. The meeting finally decided on two crucial plans for the future of Firefly Records. One was to recall the group of kids from the Mickey Mouse Club to evaluate and nurture their potential. The other was to issue an acquisition invitation to an inconspicuous subsidiary company under Sony Music, Jive Records. Strictly speaking, Jive Records was only a subsidiary of RCA, a subsidiary of Sony BMG Records. In the huge Sony music system, Jive was very inconspicuous at the moment. However, Eric knew that in the next 10 years, the most popular teen pop singers such as Backstreet Boys, Britney Spears, Justin Timberlake, and other singers were all from Jive. This didn't mean that Jive had any magical powers, but it was because the management team of this record company was very good at packaging teen idols and singers. They even privately proposed the company's operating slogan, "Carry on with the idols to the end." Chapter 683. After a morning meeting, he had lunch with Katzenberg and discussed some trivial matters. It was not until the afternoon that Eric finally had time to learn about the mobile telecommunications operating license auction that he saw on CNN yesterday. Every country had its own radio regulations. Whether it was television media or mobile telecommunications, they all relied on radio transmission. Just like how different television stations had different radio frequencies, different telecommunications operators were also limited to operating within a certain radio frequency range. American television stations or telecommunications operators were authorized to operate within the corresponding radio frequency range from the FCC, Federal Communications Commission. These were the so-called licenses. In Eric's office at Firefly headquarters, Kelly, who was sitting on the other side of the desk, looked at Eric, who was carefully reading the basic information. Kelly, who was sitting on the other side of the desk, explained softly, "In the 80s, the wireless spectrum resources for mobile telecommunications were all applied by the operators to the FCC, and then they were allocated by the FCC. However, in recent years, the mobile telecommunications industry has been rapidly rising with the support of digital technology. Most of the spectrum resources that the operators used to obtain from the FCC are no longer enough. With the huge increase in the number of applications for spectrum licenses, the Clinton administration realized that this was a good time to generate revenue. Therefore, the spectrum resources needed by the telecom operators were divided into 3 different classes of licenses: A, B, and C for auction. What you saw on CNN yesterday was the auction of A and B licenses, mainly for traditional telecommunications operators. These 2 classes of licenses brought a total of $3.75 billion to the Ministry of Finance. Eric raised his head and asked, "What about C tiers?" Kelly said, "According to the plan given by the Clinton administration, the C-tier licenses were mainly auctioned to the emerging telecommunications operators to support the small and medium-sized enterprises in the early stages of entrepreneurship. However, the auction of the C-tier licenses was scheduled for 3 months later." Eric pondered for a moment and understood the crux of the matter. He laughed sarcastically. It was true that all crows in the world were equally black. In his previous life, Eric noticed that Unicom publicly complained that they were late in obtaining the licenses and thus missed the 4G deployment period. The situation in his memory was too similar to the current situation. The only difference was that one was a political game, and the other was purely an economic game. Currently, it was a critical period for the American mobile communication industry to upgrade from analog signals to digital signals. The traditional telecom operators already had a strong advantage. After getting the license and gaining a 3-month head start, the gap was once again widened. Those emerging telecom operators who had gotten a C-tier license could only dream of catching up. Eric could imagine that even if they got a C-tier license, the relevant small and medium-sized enterprises would only be swallowed up by the established telecom giants when the time came. Noticing the expression on Eric's face, Kelly could also guess what he was thinking. She smiled and said, "You must have guessed that the FCC did this because of the influence of the established telecommunications operators like AT&T and Sprint. However, there's something even more outrageous next?" Eric was puzzled and asked, "What?" Kelly flipped through the thick folder on the table and found a document. She passed it to Eric and said, "Look, this is the FCC's detailed bidding document for the spectrum license auction. Turn to page 12. I've drawn a red line." Eric flipped to the page that Kelly mentioned and saw a paragraph marked with a red line. "C-tier licenses will be auctioned separately in order to give more opportunities to minorities, women, township operators, and small enterprises to obtain a more level playing field." Eric read it a few times and did not find anything wrong with it. He raised his head curiously and asked, "What's wrong with this paragraph?" Kelly smiled and said, "You wouldn't have guessed it, right? Right after the auction ended yesterday, someone made an issue out of this sentence. About 6 small enterprises that submitted their applications for C-tier licenses filed a lawsuit in the federal court at the same time. They claimed that the FCC's description of race and gender in the bidding document violated the United States Constitution's provisions on national equality and was suspected of discrimination. They requested the FCC to amend it and apologize for the offensive words. Eric was really shocked this time. He did not know that this was possible. After being reborn for so many years, Eric had some understanding of the United States legal rules. Since someone had filed a lawsuit, this matter was definitely not something that could be settled by the FCC simply amending the bidding document. Everyone had to gather their lawyers and study the United States Constitution together to see if this paragraph was really unconstitutional. The Constitution was so thick that it would take at least a month or 2 to go through it. This was the so-called evidence collection stage. After the evidence was collected, both parties would have to argue in court. Even if the district court gave a verdict, if one party did not agree with the verdict and continued to appeal, then the lawsuit would continue. In the end, after all this trouble, it would probably take more than half a year for the lawsuit to end. The auction of C-tier licenses was 3 months later than the auction of A-tier and B-tier licenses. Now that there was a lawsuit, it was estimated that the so-called new telecom operators would have to wait until at least next year to get their licenses. Okay, let's not talk about this. Eric put the bidding document aside and gestured to the office that he was in. It was not luxurious but was still exquisite and grand. He smiled and said, "I think it's a bit wrong for us to be discussing these issues. I'm now a capitalist, the kind that has no conscience." Kelly was amused by Eric's words. Eric wasn't wrong. It was only because this incident happened in the telecommunications industry that they didn't have much to do with. That was why they felt it was unfair to see this situation. However, if something similar happened in Hollywood, the Big Seven would definitely not hesitate to unite and strangle the latecomers that might threaten their position in the cradle. So, Eric, are you planning to get involved in the mobile telecommunications industry? Yesterday, when he saw the news of the mobile operation license auction, Eric was indeed very tempted. Now was the beginning of the mobile telecommunications industry's explosion. Investing in the telecommunications industry would definitely bring rich returns. However, from the example of the C-tier license auction, it could be seen that the water was too deep. Before he figured out the situation, Eric did not want to risk getting involved. Shaking his head regretfully, Eric rubbed the folder in front of him and said, "Let's not think about this for now. By the way, Kelly, have you contacted Qualcomm?" "Oh, I was just about to tell you." Kelly took out the memo and flipped through a few pages. She handed a note to Eric and said, "Qualcomm CEO, Owen Jacob, is very interested in our contact. However, he has been in Korea recently and will only be back next week. He called me and said that he will fly directly to Los Angeles when the time comes. He hopes to talk to you face to face. Here, this is Owen Jacob's phone number in Korea. He said that you can call him at any time." Eric took the note and looked at it. He smiled and said, "Qualcomm is so eager. This is not a good habit. Aren't they afraid of walking into the tiger's mouth? Qualcomm is in a very bad situation now. So far, they have only won the opportunity to build a CDMA network in Korea. However, the telecommunications market in Korea is too small. It will not have much impact on the overall global communication technology standards. Moreover, a week before the Spectrum license auction, AT&T just announced that it will build a GSM network nationwide. As the largest telecommunications operator in the Federation, the communication technology standards set by AT&T will definitely drive a group of followers. The technical maturity of GSM is much higher than that of CDMA. Once most operators switch to GSM, Qualcomm may even face bankruptcy. At this point, Kelly paused and said, "Firefly Investment will soon buy more than 1 million shares of Qualcomm shares. If this continues, Eric, once Qualcomm goes bankrupt, these shares will become worthless." Qualcomm's first IPO in 1992 issued a total of 6 million shares in circulation, accounting for 30% of the total share capital. Because of the rise of GSM, Qualcomm's development had lagged behind in recent years, so there was no further financing. At the moment, Qualcomm's stock price was only around $17, and its total market value was only $340 million. To be honest, if he could buy all of Qualcomm, Eric would not hesitate at all. After all, just the revenue from the Victoria's Secret show alone could bring him more than $300 million in income. The entire Firefly Group, because there was no large-scale expansion plan for the time being, relied on the profitability second to none in Hollywood. Firefly Group was now facing a very happy problem, which was that they had too much money. 1 million shares is only 17 million, Eric said to Kelly. I plan to buy at least 3 million shares, so it will only cost $50 million. This investment is equivalent to a medium-sized production investment film. It doesn't matter even if it loses all of it. Yeah, it really doesn't matter to you. Kelly also realized that she was a little worried. $50 million was indeed nothing for Eric's current net worth. While the two were discussing, Eric's mobile phone on his desk rang. After the call was connected, Elizabeth's voice came from the other side. Eric said a few words and hung up. Kelly also heard some information from the conversation between the two and asked, "Miss Murdoch?" "Yeah, about the Golden Globe Awards and the Oscars. Saving Private Ryan and Braveheart are up against each other. Liz asked me to talk about the public relations for the 2 film awards. Eric stood up and Kelly thoughtfully took his coat. Eric reached out and put it on. He looked at the female assistant who was gently helping him button up. Eric inexplicably had the illusion that a wife was sending her husband on a date with another woman. He reached out and hugged Kelly's waist, smiled, and said, "It's so strange, why do I suddenly feel a little guilty?" Kelly smiled and did not stop what she was doing. She said with a little feminine emotion, "I just want to make you feel guilty." You can keep this to yourself. Don't tell anyone. Will it be troublesome for you if it gets out? Eric nodded vigorously. Very troublesome. After the popular New Year, the most important thing for Hollywood was undoubtedly to deal with the upcoming award season. Compared to last year's Oscars, this year's award season also did not have the so-called movie that everyone expected. Instead, there was a confrontation between Saving Private Ryan and Braveheart. Although the Oscar nominations had not yet been released, in the more important Golden Globe Awards nominations, the 2 films coincidentally received 5 nominations at the same time: Best Drama Film, Best Director, Best Actor, Best Screenplay, and Best Soundtrack. Mel Gibson's performance could only be regarded as average. Eric remembered that he did not receive a nomination for Best Actor in the original Spacetime. Now that there was such a nomination at the Golden Globe Awards, it should be the result of Wayne Stan's public relations. As early as more than a year ago, Eric and Elizabeth had a discussion about the strategy of these 2 films. However, plans could never keep up with changes. Many things still needed to be changed according to the current situation. Under Mira Mike's reasonable operation, Braveheart was undoubtedly more successful in the box office than the version in the original Spacetime that won an award but lost the box office. Braveheart began to be released on a small scale in early December last year and continued to accumulate reputation and box office. During the Christmas period, Mira Mike increased the release to 2,000 theaters. With the advertising effect brought by the Golden Globe Award nomination and the accumulation of reputation from long-term operations, the film earned more than $26 million in box office that week. It was just the first week after the new year and the total box office of Braveheart was close to $60 million. With the continued hot topic of the award season, the box office of many year-end movies dropped significantly. However, the weekly box office of Braveheart remained firm and maintained a weak drop of about 20%. If this situation continued until the Oscars, the total box office of Braveheart was estimated to be about $120 million. With an Oscar, Braveheart was likely to be able to recoup all its costs through overseas distribution. Eric left the Firefly headquarters and went to an open-air restaurant in Beverly Hills that was frequented by Hollywood celebrities according to the address given by Elizabeth. Although it was afternoon, there were still many guests leisurely drinking coffee and chatting casually in the restaurant. Some of them were familiar faces. Seeing the waiter leading Eric in, many guests stood up to greet Eric. After exchanging greetings and passing through the crowd, Eric saw Elizabeth and Harvey Wayne Stan on the restaurant's balcony. They sat down at the table and ordered a cup of coffee. Eric looked at the gentle slope covered with shrubs, the Beverly Hills mansions scattered like chess pieces in his field of vision, and the city of Los Angeles in the distance. He nodded and said, "The scenery here is really good. No wonder there are so many guests." Harvey Wayne Stan said with a smile, "Eric, if you like, you can come here often in the future. The owner of this restaurant is my friend. I will ask him to give you a free meal." Eric gestured to the eyes that were still glancing at them and joked, "A free meal is definitely not enough. If I come here often, your friend may have to pay me advertising fees or something." Elizabeth and Harvey both laughed. If Eric really came here often, the number of customers trying to get close to him in the restaurant would definitely increase exponentially. It would be more useful than a billboard. The 3 of them chatted casually for a while before the topic gradually turned to the awards season. P.S. The C-tier license in the United States was delayed for a year and a half before it was auctioned. After that, there was no more. Until now, the main operators in the United States are still AT&T and Sprint. This reminds me of the situation 2 years ago when we opened up virtual operation licenses to private capital. At that time, Everyone was hoping that Alibaba would come out and make trouble for the Three Big Mountains or something. However, after the licenses were issued, it seemed that there was no more after that. Now it seems that it is more realistic to hope that Mobile Connect would really speed up and reduce the fees a few times. Chapter 684. Not only did Saving Private Ryan and Braveheart coincidentally receive the same Golden Globe Award nomination, but the similarities between the two films could be found everywhere. They were both epic films, had the same profound theme, and had the same outstanding war scenes. Even the soundtrack of the film was composed by two of Hollywood's top musicians, John Williams and James Horner. Therefore, the popularity of the two films in the award season was almost equal. Recently, the supporters of Saving Private Ryan and Braveheart were also arguing fiercely in the media. If Firefly and Fox were just competitors, then this year's award season, both on the surface and in private, the two companies would be fighting fiercely for the most important film awards. This situation would undoubtedly lead to unnecessary expenditure on the public relations budget of both parties, and the final awards would not be in their best interests. However, because of the relationship between Eric and Elizabeth, the two parties had already formed a certain tacit understanding a long time ago. Eric, from the current situation, separating the Best Picture and Best Director awards is the most beneficial for both of us, Harvey Weinstein analyzed seriously. Saving Private Ryan is nearing the end of its global release, and the video of the film was released in North America 2 months ago. Therefore, I think the most suitable award for this film should be Best Director. Although this film is full of masculinity, Catherine is a woman. In the history of the Oscars, although there have been a few female directors who have been nominated, no woman has ever won Best Director. Therefore, if Saving Private Ryan wins Best Director, the sensation it will cause will be no less than that of Best Picture. After all, the Oscars already have 66 Best Picture nominees, but not one Best Female Director. In the next few decades, the Best Female Director award will only be Catherine. As long as Saving Private Ryan wins Best Director, this film will maintain a lasting influence for many years to come. Eric nodded. Although Harvey Weinstein did not mention anything related to the film's income, he was actually analyzing the pros and cons of the award from a business perspective. Once Catherine became the first woman to win the Academy Award for Best Director, Saving Private Ryan would have a very special place in the history of cinema. This meant that Saving Private Ryan would be unique until the second female Academy Award for Best Director appeared. Whenever someone thought of the Academy Award for Best Director, they would often quickly notice the only woman in it, and then they would also notice this film. This also meant that Saving Private Ryan would, for many years to come, bring Firefly profits through videocassettes, DVDs, and other peripheral channels far surpassing the profits of other films that won Best Director. Harvey Weinstein noticed Eric's approving look and continued, Braveheart is still in the screening stage, so the best film title is more important to us. If we do our own PR, with the strength of the two films, the final result will be difficult to predict. I personally think that the final result is likely to be the opposite of what we expect. This was because Saving Private Ryan was an American war film. Compared to Braveheart, which was about British history, Saving Private Ryan had a higher chance of winning the Best Film Award. In terms of Best Director, there are not many women in the Directors Association. Most of them are old men with a strong male bias. In this regard, Mel Gibson has a much higher chance of winning than Catherine. If we want the result to develop in the direction we want, after the Oscar nomination, we must reach some tacit understanding in advance. Although Braveheart, which was released at the end of the year, had the best timing compared to Saving Private Ryan, which had been out of North America for a long time, it could easily have the greatest media influence during the awards season. However, if the Oscar potential of the two films was carefully analyzed, Saving Private Ryan had the two advantages of an American theme and extreme political correctness. If the two sides did their own things in terms of Oscar PR, the result was really unpredictable. After Harvey finished speaking, Eric nodded and said, Harvey, I will call Katzenberg tonight and ask the person in charge of the Firefly Awards PR to contact you tomorrow. You can communicate in private. Harvey Weinstein appeared here because he wanted to hear the promise of cooperation from Eric. After all, The best win-win situation was for everyone to happily share the cake. Otherwise, the final result would either be the opposite of what both sides wanted, as Wayne Stan had just said, or one side would be completely defeated. This was definitely not what the two companies with a very good relationship wanted to see. After confirming the main problem, Harvey Wayne Stan also talked about some details in a relaxed manner. Eric, Ms. Bigelow is also the main producer of Saving Private Ryan, but I heard that she doesn't seem to have participated in too many public relations activities for the Golden Globe Awards recently. The Golden Globe Awards certainly don't matter, but if Saving Private Ryan wants to win the Oscar for Best Director, she should show up more. Even if she doesn't attend too many public relations parties in private, I think she should accept a few more public media interviews or something. The most important steps of public relations for awards included media publicity and private public relations with the judges. The ultimate goal was actually like an election, to pull votes from the judges through various influences. Wayne Stan's suggestion was, of course, very pertinent. Although Eric agreed very much, he still smiled and said, "Harvey, you may not know, but Catherine is a bit, well, she's kind of idealistic. She doesn't like this kind of activity very much, so I can't force her." Harvey Wayne Stan was stunned. If the operation was done properly, the post-production videotape and TV broadcast license of Saving Private Ryan could continue to bring in hundreds of millions of dollars of net income for Firefly. With such a big business, how could Firefly let the director do whatever she wanted just because of her idealism? However, Harvey quickly remembered some private rumors, and Catherine's beautiful face that had no traces of age at all appeared in his mind. He smiled knowingly and did not intend to mention this matter again. Elizabeth, who had been quietly listening to the two talking, suddenly muttered with jealousy, "She's already in her 40s and still idealistic. Does she think she's a little girl?" Eric almost choked on his coffee. He hurriedly placed the coffee cup carefully on the table and looked up to glare at Elizabeth, who was suddenly jealous. She glared back at him unceremoniously. Harvey Wayne Stan keenly sensed that the atmosphere was getting a little out of hand, so he tactfully got up and left. After getting a firm promise from Eric, the follow-up public relations details of the awards naturally did not require Eric's personal attention. Harvey would communicate with the relevant person in charge of Firefly. After getting up to send Harvey off, Eric and Elizabeth sat down again. When the two of them were alone, Elizabeth also realized that her temper just now was a little inappropriate, but she was unwilling to take the initiative to give in. She did not dare to look at Eric in the eyes. Instead, she looked into the distance, as if she was counting the number of mansions on the hillside. Eric waved his hand and asked the waiter to bring them a pot of coffee. He also followed Elizabeth's gaze and looked into the distance. After a moment of silence, Elizabeth suddenly became a little angry again. She stared at Eric and said, "Julia is right. You bastard, you don't know how to accommodate us at all." Eric felt a little puzzled. "Your Highness, what did I do wrong again? You should have taken the initiative to speak first. You actually need me to break the silence." Eric did not know whether to laugh or cry. "I thought you were thinking about life just now. I didn't disturb you. You're not a little girl. Why are you thinking about these things? Why can some people in their 40s still be a little girl, but I can't?" Eric could only surrender. "Okay, you continue to have a little girl's mentality. This way, you might be as beautiful as Catherine when you're her age." "Yes." Elizabeth suddenly felt a little proud. "When I'm 40 years old, you can imagine what she will look like." Eric could imagine it now because he had seen it before. More than 10 years later, Catherine would be no different from now. If this woman could live her entire life as a vixen, she would not have wasted her life in this world. Elizabeth noticed the smile on Eric's face when he was deep in thought. She pretended to shiver in disgust and said, "You're really imagining it, and you can still smile. You're so perverted. No wonder people say you have that complex." Eric did not intend to discuss Catherine with Elizabeth anymore. He took the initiative to change the topic. "I saw that Mel Gibson was nominated for Best Actor at the Golden Globe Awards. It's already a bit of a stretch for his acting to be nominated for the Golden Globe Awards. You're not planning to get him nominated for an Oscar, are you?" Eric and Harvey did not talk about the public relations issues of the Golden Globe Awards at all. This was mainly because the Golden Globe Awards did not seem to be important to Saving Private Ryan. The influence of the Golden Globe Awards usually only existed before and after the awards, and then it would quickly be overshadowed by the influence of the Oscars. For a movie that was released in theaters, the media attention of the Golden Globe Awards might have a positive effect on the box office. However, this kind of positive effect did not have much of an impact on a movie that had already entered the post-production stage. For Saving Private Ryan, the most important thing was still the Oscars. After all, when any news of Saving Private Ryan appeared in the media in the future, it would often be mentioned because of the Oscar title. When Saving Private Ryan sold overseas videotapes or television broadcast rights, the buyers would often only care about the Oscars. Most of the time, even if it was just an Oscar nomination, it was much more valuable than the Golden Globe Awards. This difference was even more obvious in the actor awards. For example, in the original Spacetime, Xiao Lizi, who had been pursuing the Oscar for many years, many people did not even know that Xiao Lizi had already won the Golden Globe Award 10 years before he got his wish. When Elizabeth heard Eric changing the topic, she cleverly did not continue to harp on it. She said, "Speaking of which, Mel Gibson even quarreled with Harvey because of this nomination." Chapter 685. Eric was puzzled. "Why?" Elizabeth said, "Didn't you just say it yourself?" With Mel Gibson's acting skills, it would be very difficult for him to even be nominated for a Golden Globe. Ever since the Golden Globe nominations were announced, the media has been debating this matter. Mel Gibson wants Best Director and doesn't want a Best Actor nomination to affect his reputation. However, in order to increase the attention of Braveheart, Harvey still insisted on applying for Best Actor for him. Eric immediately understood. With such an outstanding film like Braveheart, its reputation had already been confirmed. Therefore, continuing to promote the film's reputation in the media would not affect the box office too much. At this time, stirring up some controversial topics to increase the popularity of the film could actually boost the box office. Mel Gibson's nomination for the Golden Globe Award for Best Actor was undoubtedly the so-called controversial topic that Weinstein had picked out. Many fans who were originally not very interested in Braveheart, after noticing the debate in the media, often bought tickets to enter the venue in order to find out what was going on. At the same time, Mike Mira had already confirmed that Mel Gibson would not receive the Best Director award. This kind of man-made controversy would not affect the established public relations strategy. In the original Spacetime, although the Weinstein brothers were known as the Oscar gods, in fact, it was more accurate to call them Oscar businessmen. This was because the most fundamental purpose of the two brothers operating the Oscar awards was for profit. As long as they could get more profit, the two brothers could not only win some PR awards for some films that were not necessarily good enough, but they could also use some means like now to ruin the nominations that were originally hopeful of winning an award. Eric knew that the Golden Globe was just an appetizer, so he asked, "Did you also apply for Mel Gibson's nomination for Best Actor?" Elizabeth nodded and said somewhat helplessly, "Mel Gibson disliked Harvey from the beginning. During the filming of Braveheart, he often complained that Harvey was too controlling. Joe Roth and I often had to personally mediate. When he heard that Harvey applied for Best Actor for Braveheart, he even scolded Harvey for being a greedy Jew to his face. Harvey was furious. We're all Australians, so we thought we'd have more opportunities to work together in the future. We've been trying to build a good relationship with Gibson, and Dad was the one who personally signed the contract for Braveheart. But after this, it will be difficult for us to work with him again. Mike Mira's performance this year has far exceeded our expectations when we acquired him. Between Gibson and the Weinstein brothers, we can only choose the latter. If they don't want to work with us, then so be it. If the film studio overindulges the big-name actors, they'll be the ones to suffer in the end. It's easy for you to say. Everyone is doing it. If we don't do it, we won't be able to get a good project. Fox isn't a firefly. You're just like a chef who runs a restaurant. Even if you can't hire a chef, you can do it yourself. You can even cook better food than the chef. But we can't do that." Eric smiled and said, "Your analogy is really apartment, you've been quite free lately. Why don't you come to Fox and cook a few dishes for us? Forget it. I can't even be bothered to enter my own kitchen now. I haven't heard any news about your next film after Jurassic Park. Are you planning to retire? Of course not. Didn't I just shoot a Victoria's Secret annual show? It's just that it didn't appear on the big screen. It was released on video. I heard that it sold well. Have you seen it? Elizabeth nodded with a smile. It may have sold 20 million units in North America. If it's a movie, it's likely to be at the top of the video sales chart this year. The songs in it are really nice. And those little beauties. TSK TSK. Hey, how many did you sleep with? Eric looked like he was reminiscing. With a satisfied expression, he said, Of course I didn't let any of them go. Every night, I change to a different one. Occasionally, I even have a few one-on-ones. Sigh, a pervert like me. Before Eric could finish, Elizabeth picked up a nut chocolate from the dessert plate on the table and threw it at Eric. Eric dodged with a smile. When he saw the chocolate hit the railing and scattered on the edge of the balcony, he said with a pained expression, Throwing food around is really unethical. Elizabeth raised her chin. Bite me. While the two were bickering, they suddenly heard a few soft squeaks. They turned their heads and saw a furry squirrel poking its head out of the balcony for a moment. Then, it carefully jumped up and picked up a piece of nut chocolate with its two front paws. It sniffed it and immediately ate it. Noticing that Eric and Elizabeth were looking at it, the little guy didn't run away, but it sped up its eating speed. Its cheeks were soon full. Although Beverly Hills was a residential area, the ecological protection was very good. There were all kinds of birds and small animals. This open-air restaurant built on a gentle slope was surrounded by fine shrubs. It was normal for these little things to be foraging for food. Not far away, the waiter noticed that Eric and Elizabeth's gazes were attracted by the squirrel on the balcony. Worried that these little things would upset the two big shots, he took the initiative to come over and chase the squirrel away. However, he was stopped by Eric with a wave of his hand. What are you thinking about? Elizabeth asked as she looked away from the squirrel because of Eric's gesture. Nothing. I gave the little guy a name. What do you think of Scott? Elizabeth's eyes darted between the squirrel and Eric a few times before she said with sparkling eyes, I was the one who lured this little guy here. Eric smiled as he picked up another piece of chocolate and threw it over. When he saw the frightened little guy shrink back, he quickly picked up the chocolate that was bigger than his head and ran away. Then, he turned back to Elizabeth. Since you were the one who lured him here, come. Brainstorm and make up a random story for me to see. Elizabeth stared at the edge of the balcony where the squirrel had disappeared with interest for a while and said intermittently, Squirrel, chocolate, looking for food, winter, and humans. Eric smiled as he looked at Elizabeth, who was racking her brains. Unknowingly, a story idea similar to robbing the nut shop was almost formed. However, it was definitely 1,000 miles away from Ice Age. Elizabeth used 10 minutes to come up with a story and was a little proud. She wanted to ask Eric what idea he came up with, but an uninvited guest appeared in front of them. Howard Stringer had just taken over the affairs of Sony in the United States. Because of the mess in Colombia, he had been in a state of heavy workload recently. He looked a little tired, but at this moment, he still looked like an elegant scholar. Under the guidance of the waiter, he came to Eric and Elizabeth. Howard Stringer shook hands with Eric and Elizabeth and smiled. Eric, I'm sorry to be so presumptuous, but can I sit down? Of course, please sit down. Eric nodded. Since the other party had come looking for him, Eric would not be too unreasonable. He signaled the waiter to serve Howard Stringer a cup of coffee and asked, Howard, why are you looking for me? Eric had no intention of making small talk, so Howard Stringer did not beat around the bush. He said, It's like this, Eric. Columbia received a notice from Flower Pictures this morning that they intend to cancel the distribution contract for Night at the Museum and Forrest Gump. I think this is completely unnecessary, isn't it? Howard Stringer came looking for him directly, so Eric did not push the blame to Drew and Amy. He said, Columbia felt that the original distribution contract was unreasonable. Let's part on good terms. I don't think there's anything wrong with this. Howard Stringer's tone was still gentle as he said, Eric, it's just a very minor disagreement. There's no need to cancel the cooperation at all. After all, Columbia and Flower Pictures have a good cooperation on Mission Impossible. Howard, Columbia started this matter first. Flower Pictures does not have the ability to take risks like Columbia. After you raised objections to the contract, Flower Pictures has already started to prepare for a retreat. If we go back to Columbia now, Flower Pictures will lose trust with our new partner. We can't do that. Howard Stringer knew that Eric was talking nonsense. If Flower Pictures found a new partner, such as Fox or MGM, these two companies would have leaked the news to the media. After taking a sip of coffee, Howard Stringer suddenly changed the topic and said, Eric, I just received news that Jive Records, a subsidiary of Sony Music, has just received an acquisition offer from Firefly. This should be true, right? Chapter 686. Eric did not expect Firefly's management to be so decisive. They had just proposed this in the morning, and now they are attacking Jive Records in the afternoon. However, he wasn't too surprised. Jive Records had its glory days around 2000. Teen pop hadn't risen yet, and Jive's market value was less than $10 million. Compared to the entire Firefly group, it wasn't worth mentioning. When Eric heard Howard Stringer using Jive Records as a bargaining chip, he smiled and said, Howard, Katzenberg is indeed planning to acquire some potential record companies to expand Firefly Records. Since you said so, it must be true. But unless Firefly is going to acquire Sony Records, I will not interfere with these small matters. If you have any questions, you can call Katzenberg and the rest. Howard Stringer did not know that Eric was the one who ordered him to do this. When he heard what Eric said, he was a little hesitant. After receiving the news from Jive, Howard Stringer hurriedly asked someone to find information about this inconspicuous subsidiary company. He found that Jive Records had always been focused on black hip-hop music. Except for the industry gossip where they had the opportunity to sign Will Smith but unfortunately missed it, Jive Records had never cultivated any heavyweight black singers over the years. Perhaps it was because of their long-term inactivity in hip-hop that Jive Records management was recently trying to make a transition. Howard Stringer studied this company several times, but he could not find anything about Jive Records that attracted Firefly. Howard Stringer did not think that things were as simple as what Eric said. Howard Stringer looked at Eric, who was sitting opposite him, and decided to lay his cards on the table. He said, Eric, how about this? Flower Pictures' distribution contract with Columbia will remain unchanged. In return, I can sell Jive Records to Firefly. Columbia was a mediocre subsidiary. If they lost Night at the Museum and Forrest Gump, it would be impossible for them to find 2 more films to fill their summer slots. Columbia's performance was terrible. If they could not even maintain their performance on the surface, Sony's film business would undoubtedly be under greater pressure from investors. However, Eric still shook his head casually and said, Howard, I've said it before. I don't care about the acquisition of Jive Records. You don't have to use this as a bargaining chip. I'll say it again. Columbia was the one who started this. Since you're not willing to cooperate, we'll go our separate ways. Eric's stubbornness made Howard Stringer a little angry. He said, Eric, the contract between Columbia and Flower Pictures hasn't been terminated yet. If Flower Pictures wants to forcefully terminate the distribution contract, Columbia won't rule out the opportunity to use litigation to protect its interests. Eric suddenly leaned forward with a dangerous look in his eyes. Howard, listen to me. Don't do this. Otherwise, you will find that Columbia will face more trouble than Flower Pictures. Howard Stringer retorted, Eric, Columbia already has enough trouble. If we have no other choice, we don't mind adding more trouble. And then, Eric continued Howard Stringer's words. Without waiting for the other party to speak, he continued, then, you will find that the business in Columbia will be even worse. You are from the media industry, and EA hired you to revive Sony's entertainment industry in the US. If you can't do this, you will not be valuable to Sony. When Columbia's business becomes worse, Sony will have to find another scapegoat. That scapegoat can only be you. But now, you still have another choice. Tolerate this, and Columbia will only lose a summer slot. But the situation will not worsen, and Sony's higher-ups will be the ones to blame for losing the summer slot. So, Howard, what are you going to do? Howard Stringer leaned back in his chair and his eyes flickered. He didn't say anything for a long time. Eric ignored him and felt the setting sun on his body. He reached out and waved for the waiter not far away to ask for the menu. He discussed with Elizabeth in a low voice and ordered dinner. Then, he handed the menu to the waiter and said to Howard Stringer, "So, Howard, do you plan to stay for dinner?" Howard Stringer seemed to have been suddenly awakened. He shook his head slightly and did not say anything else. He got up and left. Eric only nodded and did not get up to send Howard Stringer off. Instead, it was Elizabeth who looked at Howard Stringer's figure and said, "Eric, aren't you afraid of pushing him into a corner? Since he can climb to the position of CEO of Sony's US branch, he will not do anything rash. But he will realize that the position of CEO of Sony's US branch is not as good as he thought. He will be depressed for a while. Although Peter Guber was kicked out of Columbia, Columbia will continue to live under Firefly's shadow for the next few years because of Men in Black and other projects. Unless Howard Stringer decided to abandon his reliance on Firefly and develop his own film business on his own from now on. But the reality was, from Howard Stringer's memory of Columbia Pictures' performance after he took over Sony's American branch, it was clear that he did not have this talent. Columbia did not even have an outstanding manager. A few days later, Columbia accepted the termination of its distribution contract with Flower Pictures. Between fighting for the interests of Sony and protecting his own job, Howard Stringer obviously chose the latter. However, Firefly's acquisition of Jive Records had run into trouble. Sony Records had rejected Firefly's acquisition offer. However, Eric was not interested in Jive Records' signed singers or their music copyrights. Instead, he was interested in the management team of Jive Records, who created the peak of teen pop in his previous life. After the acquisition of Jive Records failed, Firefly turned to Jive Records' management team and promised Jive's CEO, Barry Weiss, the position of CEO of Firefly Records. Although Sony Records knew about this and paid more attention to Jive Records, Barry Weiss did not hesitate to choose between the CEO of Firefly Records and a subsidiary of Sony Records. Soon, Jive Records' management team left Sony Records and joined Firefly. Los Angeles International Airport. The turbulence of the landing woke Owen Jacobs up from his sleep. After more than 20 hours of flight, he was exhausted. After more than 3 years of operation, and even a large part of the technology rights, Qualcomm received the support of the Korean government on CDMA. But because of the strong rise of GSM and the widespread popularization in Asia, Korea began to waver. Owen Jacobs had to go to Korea personally to deal with this crisis. Thinking of Qualcomm's current situation in North America, Owen Jacobs could not help but feel a little confused. AT&T, the largest telecommunications operator in the US, had established the GSM system as the mobile communication standard, which directly caused a group of smaller telecommunications operators to follow AT&T's footsteps. Qualcomm was almost on the verge of life and death. If they could not win over CDMA supporters in the US as soon as possible, even if Qualcomm had more advanced technology, it would inevitably go bankrupt. And now, the meeting with the young man was a crucial opportunity for Qualcomm. Owen Jacobs walked out of the airport with his assistant. Standing in the bright eyes of Los Angeles, Owen Jacobs relaxed a little. He looked around in the crowd and soon saw Aaron Salmasai, one of Qualcomm's partners, greeting him. The two hugged. Then Aaron Salmasai took Owen Jacobs and Owen Jacobs to a black car. He ordered Owen Jacobs' assistant to drive, and Aaron Salmasai took Owen Jacobs to sit in the back. As soon as he sat down in the car, Owen Jacobs couldn't wait to ask, "Aaron, have you contacted Eric Williams?" "Of course," Aaron Salmasai nodded and said, "Tomorrow at noon, Eric Williams invited us to have lunch together at the Malibu Point Manor." Owen Jacobs was a little anxious. "Tomorrow at noon, it's only 10 o'clock in the morning now. Why don't you make an appointment today?" Aaron Salmasai patted his old friend on the shoulder. Hey, Owen, relax a little. You have been flying for more than 20 hours. You have to take a break. You don't want to meet Eric Williams in this state, right? Also, we have to discuss the plan again. This may be our last chance. If we miss it, our 10 years of hard work will likely be in vain. Owen Jacobs calmed down and nodded when he heard his friend say this. They drove all the way to a hotel in Santa Monica. Aaron Salmasai had already arranged a hotel room for Owen Jacobs and his assistant. After a simple wash, Owen Jacobs went to Aaron Salmasai's room. Aaron Salmasai asked Owen Jacobs to sit down on the sofa and turned to make coffee. As soon as Owen Jacobs sat down, he was attracted by a Fortune magazine on the coffee table because the cover of the magazine was a photo of Eric on the movie set. Owen Jacobs picked up the magazine and found a bookmark in the magazine. He curiously flipped to the page, but it was an article introducing the Firefly Group. Owen Jacobs casually glanced at it and was quickly attracted by the content. Aaron Salmasai walked over and noticed Owen Jacobs' focused expression. He carefully put the filled coffee aside and quietly sat down on the other side of the sofa. At the beginning of a new year, countless media outlets were looking back at the past and looking forward to the future. For financial media outlets, every new year was the time for them to tabulate and rank the economic data of the previous year. And the Firefly Group, which frequently made various big moves last year, was undoubtedly the focus of the financial media in the UA. Although Firefly had not announced the fourth quarter of last year and the annual financial report, based on the data of the first 3 quarters, Fortune magazine estimated that Firefly Group's 1994 annual revenue was likely to reach US $18 billion, and the annual operating net profit would also be around US $1.5 billion. At the same time, Firefly had 2 major non-operating income last year, US $1.5 billion from the divestiture of paper assets and US $2.5 billion from the auction of Disney's animation department. With such strong profitability, Firefly had already surpassed Time Warner Group, which was ranked second in Hollywood, and had become a veritable media giant. Aaron Salmasai patiently waited for Owen Jacobs to finish reading the article and said, "Are you surprised?" Owen Jacobs nodded and said, "More than US $10 billion in cash reserves, US $2.5 billion in discretionary cash flow. It's hard to imagine that Hollywood can produce such a profitable company. Eric Williams is only 25 years old this year, right? Yes, but this young man simply appeared in this world to create miracles. Just like the Victoria's Secret annual show that was hyped by the media at the end of last year. In order to operate the Victoria's Secret brand, Eric Williams spent US $20 million on the luxury lingerie show in half a year. Originally, many people thought that the US $20 million expenditure could only be earned back through the appreciation of the Victoria's Secret brand and the profits from product sales. But after the Victoria's Secret show was released, the sales suddenly exploded. The US $29.9 per box of videotapes were expected to sell 20 million boxes. This alone could bring US $300 million in income to Eric Williams. Later, Eric Williams returned the copyright of the Victoria's Secret show to Ltd. And received equity worth more than US $200 million, Aaron Salmasai said with some emotion. He obviously did a lot of preparation work and learned a lot about Eric. Owen Jacobs was also a little emotional. However, he was already 62 years old and had experienced many things. Although he was shocked, his emotions were not too agitated. The two finished a cup of coffee and talked about business. Aaron Salmasai handed the prepared materials to Owen Jacobs and said, "This is the detailed plan. You can take a look first." Owen Jacobs flipped through the materials in his hands. The FCC had just held a spectrum license auction for established telecommunications companies not long ago. For these established telecommunications companies that had already obtained A-tier and B-tier licenses, Qualcomm's influence was very weak. It could not influence which mobile communication technology these established telecommunications companies used. Therefore, Qualcomm had mainly focused on C-tier licenses from the beginning. Compared to the A-tier and B-tier licenses that were only available to a limited number of companies, the C-tier license auction that had countless bidders would undoubtedly be very competitive. In the future, those small and medium-sized telecommunications companies that had paid a high price to win the spectrum licenses would definitely pursue more economical and affordable mobile communication technology in their actual development. Compared to GSM technology, CDMA had a great advantage in network construction costs and spectrum utilization efficiency. At the beginning, Qualcomm's worst-case scenario was that once CDMA technology was abandoned by all the established telecommunications companies, Qualcomm would strive to obtain commercial opportunities from C-tier license holders. However, after Eric expressed his interest in Qualcomm, one of Qualcomm's partners, Aaron Salmasai, quickly came up with a very bold idea. They planned to get enough financial support from Eric, and then buy all the C-tier licenses in one go. Then, by bundling CDMA technology, these spectrum licenses would be wholesale to small and medium-sized telecommunications companies at a relatively low price. In this way, even if CDMA technology failed miserably in front of the mainstream telecommunications companies, CDMA technology could still occupy 1/3 of the mobile communication market with the promotion of C-tier licenses. Aaron Salmasai said, "I've already registered a company called NextWave. As long as I can pull in funds from Eric Williams, I'll let go of Qualcomm's affairs and focus on NextWave to prepare for all the C-tier licenses." Owen Jacob put down the proposal in his hand. Although Aaron Salmasai's tone was full of expectation, he knew very well that his old partner was just like him. In this matter, he actually had no confidence. Because of the private tacit understanding, the competition for A-tier and B-tier licenses was not intense. However, the FCC still auctioned a sky-high price of $3.75 billion. If they wanted to buy all the spectrum licenses in the auction process of C-tier licenses with a large number of competitors, they would need to prepare at least twice the premium compared to A-tier and B-tier licenses. This number was conservatively estimated to be $4 billion. After hesitating for a moment, Owen Jacob asked, "Aaron, how likely do you think Eric Williams will provide us with $4 billion of support? Don't forget, the entire Qualcomm is not even worth $400 million now. Supporting a company with a market value of less than $400 million to implement a $4 billion huge plan, in the eyes of most people, was something that only a lunatic would do." Although they had prepared a set of words that had been discussed repeatedly, in fact, whether it was Owen Jacob or Aaron Salmasai, they did not have any confidence in their hearts. The reason why they forced out such a somewhat unrealistic plan was entirely because Qualcomm was now at a dead end. "Since Eric Williams took the initiative to contact us, then this time we will definitely be able to get some support from him. Perhaps, Eric Williams can help us lobby a mainstream telecommunications operator to accept CDMA technology." As for this plan, Alan Salmasai comforted Owen Jacob, and at the same time, he comforted himself. Then, he looked at the plan that had been drafted, and a faint bitter smile appeared on his face. "As for this, if we try it, there might be a 1% chance of success. But if we don't try it, there will be nothing." Chapter 687. Los Angeles during the award season could be said to be very lively. Unless they were filming and couldn't get away, most of the stars would gather in Hollywood during this period, either for the awards or to look for opportunities. All kinds of parties were held one after another. The stars were also enjoying the glory brought to them by their status after a busy year. However, the upcoming Golden Globe Awards were no longer attractive to Eric. He even knew the final results of some awards in advance. For example, The Lion King would win Best Picture in the musical comedy category, and for the follow-up Oscar public relations strategy, Catherine would lose to Mel Gibson in the Golden Globe Award for Best Director. After all, even the Oscars with more than 6,000 judges had been affected by public relations factors, let alone the Golden Globe Awards with only more than 90 judges. Compared to the Golden Globe Awards, Eric was more concerned about the Super Bowl 29 finals that would be held at the end of the month. This year's Super Bowl finals happened to be broadcast live by ABC, which also had a certain symbolic meaning for the Firefly Group. Of course, the three films that Firefly was about to release in the summer, Jurassic Park 2, Independence Day, and Toy Story 2, also got the best Super Bowl broadcast advertising spots. The three summer lead films were basically completed. After the Super Bowl trailer, Firefly would conduct internal test screenings of these films and make appropriate adjustments according to the audience's reaction. Then, large-scale global distribution and publicity work would begin. Although he was not as busy with public relations activities as many of the film creators who were nominated for awards, Eric was also very busy recently. At the beginning of the new year, in addition to attending various important meetings, Eric also needed to personally participate in the development of Firefly's new film projects for the new year. After the hand-drawn animation department was auctioned off, after half a year of recruitment and training, the completely digital Disney animation department had begun to take shape. At the end of last year, a 6-minute 3D animation short film was completed, and the effect was very good. In addition to more than 200 trained digital animators, after coordinating with Pixar, Eric transferred a small team from Pixar, led by Peter Doggett, to Los Angeles to be in charge of Disney's animation department. Peter Doggett also came with an animation project that he had personally conceived, Monster Power Company. Although Pixar's most famous animation in the original spacetime was Toy Story, in Eric's opinion, Monster Electric Company was the work that brought Pixar's imagination to the extreme. The idea of the monster employees passing through the spacetime gates to absorb energy by collecting children's screams was amazing. Moreover, at the end of the story, the transformation of the monsters from scaring children to bringing joy to the children was completely in line with Disney's core spirit of bringing joy to the world. Therefore, this work could almost be said to be tailor-made for the new Disney Digital Animation Department. After Peter Doggett demonstrated the story of Monster Electric Company to the management of Firefly, all the executives present unanimously agreed to immediately start the project and gave the maximum support in terms of production time and project budget. The 2 live-action movies that Firefly Pictures had already finalized, Titanic and The Matrix, had also entered the substantial preparation stage. In the studio that Firefly Pictures had specially prepared for Titanic, Cameron, who had rested for half a year and had only started work after Eric's repeated urging, was talking about his plan. I have carefully surveyed the environment of Rosarito. Firefly can build a base dedicated to shooting Titanic there. The Mexican side has agreed to cooperate with our work. I also plan to completely replicate the Titanic. This process will take about 3 months. However, during these 3 months, the crew can also shoot the corresponding indoor scenes in the studio. Eric stood in front of the workbench that was covered with draft shots. Looking at the exquisite model of the Titanic in the middle of the workbench, he suddenly interrupted Cameron. "Jim, are you saying that you plan to make a complete copy of the Titanic?" Cameron eagerly explained, "Of course, Eric, although the cost will definitely be higher, I think this is the only way to achieve 100% authenticity. If we completely use a model or a green screen for shooting, the visual effects will definitely be greatly reduced." Eric recalled the information in his mind and took the Titanic model from the workbench. He gestured with his hands and said, "Jim, I definitely agree to build the real Titanic, but there is no need to completely replicate it. You see, the 2 sides of the ship are almost exactly the same. We can just build one side. This way, we can save a lot of money, can't it?" Cameron took the model and thought for a while with his chin in his hand. He was still a little hesitant. "Eric, this way we can indeed save a lot of money, but if we use one side as both sides, a lot of props, especially props with characters and logos, will have to be completely reversed during shooting. The work of the post-production special effects will also increase a lot. Correspondingly, the production cycle will also be extended. Compared to building a complete model of the Titanic, copying a set of props with characters inverted would definitely be much cheaper, right? Jim, you should know in your heart how big the project you want to shoot is. The budget of $150 million is absolutely unprecedented. This is also the highest budget Firefly can afford, so we should save as much as we can." Although Cameron was still a little reluctant, Eric's reason made him unable to refute. He compromised and said, "Okay, Eric, we'll do as you say." As they were chatting, a staff member gently knocked on the open door. "Mr. Williams, Mr. Cameron, Miss Wazey's makeup is done. Would you like to take a look?" Eric nodded. "Of course, let her come in." Soon, Rachel Wazey walked in surrounded by a group of staff members. Everyone in the studio was almost immediately attracted by Rachel's outfit. The dark purple wide-brimmed hat set off Rachel's face, making her look a little petite. However, this did not hide the pride and stubbornness unique to an English lady as she lifted her chin slightly. The double-breasted lapel suit and dress set off Rachel's slender figure. Compared to the slightly bloated figure in his memory, she was many times stronger. The white gloves and the umbrella in her hand just so happened to add a bit of elegance to Rachel. Facing the scrutiny of everyone gathered on her, Rachel did not have stage fright at all. Instead, she took a few steps forward with a demure smile on her lips. She elegantly reached out to Cameron. "Hello, Mr. Director. I'm Rose Devine Burkett. Nice to meet you." The standard British Cockney accent woke Cameron up from his daze. He almost subconsciously took Rachel's hand and shook it gently. Then he reacted and turned his head excitedly to Eric. "That's right, Eric, this is my Rose," Eric said teasingly. "I told you, Jim, my taste in choosing the female lead is 100 times better than yours." "I hope you don't develop this taste to choosing the male lead," Cameron retorted with a little mischievousness. His gaze turned to Rachel again. After the excitement just now, there was a little more pickiness in his eyes. He waved for the costume designer to come forward and said, "The style of this suit is very good. It's just that the white color is too monotonous. Are there any other colors?" The costume designer replied, "There's also a black and white striped suit. Mr. Cameron, do you want to try it on?" "Yes, I'll try it on later." Cameron nodded and walked around Rachel. Then, he shook his head and said, "Umbrella, the umbrella is wrong too." I remember that in the information I saw, Cameron was still trying to recall when the costume designer took the initiative to explain, "Mr. Cameron, your taste is really sharp. Miss Rachel should have a wooden long-handled umbrella, but we can't find that style for the time being. We can only order it in the future. Write this down. Don't forget." Cameron nodded, took a step back, and rested his chin on his hand. Eric knew that Cameron wouldn't be able to finish it in a short time. His attention left Rachel Wasey, and he waved to the petite figure beside Rachel. Although most of the people around them were paying attention to Rachel, there were still people who noticed Eric's actions. Carolyn's face was slightly red. She smiled at Eric in a somewhat reserved manner, but she still walked over. "Good morning, Eric." Eric moved to the side and let Carolyn lean against the wide workbench with him. He smiled and asked, "It should be working hours now. Are you missing work?" "Of course not." Carolyn shrank her neck. She knew that Eric was joking with her, but she still looked at Kelly, who was standing not far away, seriously. She raised a small face and explained, "I asked for leave from Ms. Haynes. Rachel just arrived in Los Angeles yesterday, and she needs my help with a lot of things. But I can go back to work tomorrow." Eric shook his head and smiled. "There's no need to be so anxious. You two good sisters haven't seen each other for so long. You can accompany her around Los Angeles this week. You can come back to work next week." Carolyn waved her small hand and said, "It won't take so long. It's only Tuesday today." Eric patted Carolyn's shoulder and said, "Don't reject it. Just take it as a reward for your work. Kelly has been telling me that your work is outstanding, and she wants me to praise you properly." Carolyn nodded her small chin happily, but soon she asked with some uncertainty, "Really?" Eric nodded with certainty and smiled. "Really? I've seen the information on Qualcomm that you're in charge of. It's very detailed." Carolyn's face turned red, and her small head lowered subconsciously. After a while, she mustered the courage to raise her head and said, "Eric, Rachel said that she wants to take time to treat you to a meal. Thank you for helping her get this role. We know that you've been very busy recently. As long as you have time." Eric said, "Then I'll let you know when the time comes." "Will Rachel be living with you?" "Yes, Rachel is living with Melanie and me for the time being. However, Rachel's agent is looking for a house for her. She said that it's not suitable for Rachel to live with us." Rachel's agency contract was directly signed under ICM through Eric's mediation. Hearing the rare little dissatisfaction in Carolyn's tone, Eric said, "If you feel that the agent is not doing well, call me at any time. I'll ask Kapoor to change her. No, it's not like that. Carolyn quickly shook her head and said, she's doing very well. I'm just a little regretful that I can't live with Rachel. Eric smiled and did not say anything. Carolyn had grown up with the meticulous care of her relatives and friends. She had a pure heart, and it was inevitable that she was a little too dependent on the people around her. After being criticized by Cameron, Rachel went up to greet Eric. Then, Cameron rushed her to change her model. Carolyn looked at Eric with some reluctance and followed him. Eric was about to continue discussing the preparation of the project with Cameron when Kelly walked over and said, Eric, it's already 10 o'clock. You have an appointment with Qualcomm's Owen Jacobs and Aaron Salmasai at noon. Chris and Emily also called just now. They've already arrived at Sharp Corner Manor. Eric looked at his watch. It would take about an hour to rush back to Malibu from Praia Vista, and he still needed to prepare in advance. So, he said goodbye to Cameron and left Firefly Cineplex. He brought Kelly back to Sharp Corner Manor. The chef was already preparing lunch, and the twins were helping in the kitchen. The little girl and Emily were sitting in the corner by the glass wall, laughing and talking about something. Chris, who was sitting on the sofa and reading a magazine, was the first to notice Eric and Kelly. He stood up and waved his hand. After walking through the hall to the glass wall, the little girl and Emily also came over. After greeting each other, Chris did not immediately talk to Eric about Qualcomm. Instead, he took out a thick package and handed it to Eric. Eric, my father asked me to bring this to you. Eric took it curiously. He felt that there seemed to be a book inside. It was a little heavy. He asked, what is it? The few of them sat down on the sofa. The little girl stayed close to Eric and took out the things in the package without any hesitation. It was a thick stack of split-screen sketches. When Eric saw the first one from the little girl's hand, he raised his eyebrows slightly and took the stack of sketches. Although the strokes of the sketches were a little rough, it was obvious that a lot of effort had been put into each of them. Eric could still easily tell that the content of the first sketch was a person lying in a nutrition chamber with tubes inserted all over his body. He continued to flip through the sketches. For each of the subsequent sketches, he could find a familiar scene from a certain movie in his memory. Chris looked at Eric's serious expression and explained with a smile, didn't my father set up a film investment project to support young directors? Every month, the agent will hand over some scripts for him to choose from. I went back to Maryland to visit my father last week, and he just happened to receive this package. After reading the sketches, he asked me to bring it to you. He also said that these two young people are very diligent. They obviously like your novel very much. Isn't The Matrix selecting a director? Maybe you can give it a try. Eric smiled and continued to flip through the hundreds of sketches in his hand. He asked knowingly, what are their names? Chris said, they are two brothers. The older brother is called Larry Wachowski, and the younger brother is called Andy Wachowski. They have already produced a script in Hollywood. Oh, there is their contact information in the package. As Chris said that, the little girl helped Eric open the package and took out an envelope. She handed it to Eric. Eric took the letter and read it. It was written to Jeffrey. The tone of the letter was sincere, hoping that Jeffrey could recommend them to be the directors of The Matrix. Chris then explained, my father said that the two brothers were probably worried that if they sent these to Firefly, they would probably be disposed of like garbage before they could reach you. That's why they found another way to contact him. Eric put the letter and the sketches into the envelope. He smiled and said, I will consider this matter carefully. But now, let's talk about the meeting with Owen Jacobs. Chris knew that with Eric's taste in movies, if the two brothers could really take on the role of the director of The Matrix, Eric would definitely not be stingy with this opportunity. Therefore, he did not say anything else and went along with Eric's topic. I have bought 1 million shares of Qualcomm from Firefly Investment. However, there are only 6 million shares in the market after all. Our purchases during this period should have been noticed by others. Recently, Qualcomm's share price has risen to $19.60, an increase of nearly 15%, and the number of shares sold is decreasing. I'm afraid it won't be easy to continue absorbing 3 million shares in the market. Hearing Chris and Eric talking about the boring company data, the little girl obviously lost interest. She got up and pulled Emily and Kelly to the kitchen. Eric stepped aside to let the women leave. He said, "If you can't buy it, then forget it. If we can settle the next matter, we can ask Qualcomm to directly invest in Firefly to increase the number of shares." Chris nodded. He actually had the same idea. He said, "In addition, I have also recently investigated the information of the 3 major operators, AT&T, Verizon, and Sprint. CDMA is definitely not going to work for AT&T. At the same time, a group of operators relying on AT&T will definitely follow it and choose GSM technology. However, Verizon and Sprint have not yet decided on the technical standard. As long as we can pull either of them into the CDMA camp, our investment in Qualcomm will be worthwhile. As for the C-tier licenses, according to the current situation and the somewhat ridiculous lawsuit, I think that this part of the licenses will eventually be swallowed up by the 3 major operators in the future. It is unrealistic for CDMA to seek a breakthrough in this area," Chris said and handed some prepared materials to Eric. He said, "It is not impossible to pull Verizon and Sprint into the CDMA camp. This is the financial information of the 2 companies. You will understand after you take a look." Chapter 688. Eric flipped open the information Chris handed over and began to read. Compared to AT&T, the telecom giant with a market value of more than $80 billion and annual profits of more than $4 billion, the other 2 large telecom companies trying to enter the mobile communications market, Verizon and Sprint, were far worse off. Verizon's predecessor was Bell Atlantic, which was dismembered from the original AT&T in the 1984 telecom monopoly case. After 10 years of development and integration, Verizon's current market value was $23 billion. However, in recent years, Verizon had been in a state of poor performance. Last year, it lost $754 million. In comparison, Sprint, which was not part of the Bell family, only had a market value of $10.5 billion. However, Sprint's operating conditions were far better than Verizon's. Its annual profits in 1994 reached $880 million. Perhaps because of this good performance, Sprint was ambitious enough to set up a nationwide wireless communications network. Therefore, during the auction of A-tier and B-tier licenses, the wireless spectrum licenses it obtained in the end even exceeded the combined value of the 2 telecom giants, AT&T and Verizon. Sprint would have to bear as much as $1.5 billion in spectrum licensing fees. This expenditure alone was equivalent to Sprint's net profit for 2 years if it maintained its current operating condition. After reading the information, Eric more or less understood why Chris said that it was not impossible to pull Verizon and Sprint into the CDMA camp. Although these 2 companies were considered giants in the U.S. telecommunications industry, they were far from being comparable to the big brother, AT&T. Due to several mergers and acquisitions in recent years, Verizon had accumulated a huge debt of $8.9 billion, which was equivalent to 38% of the company's market value. This was the main reason why Verizon had been losing money in recent years. This spectrum license auction had added another $600 million to its debt. If it wanted to complete the construction and successful operation of the mobile communications network, its debt ratio was likely to exceed 50% in the next few years. Sprint's situation was not that good either. Although its original operating condition was very good, the company's expansion in the mobile communications field this time was too big. The $1.5 billion in spectrum license expenses and the huge amount of funds needed to build a national mobile communications network in the next few years might even lead it to follow the same path as Verizon for a long time in the future. The rich and powerful AT&T did not hesitate to choose GSM technology as its mobile communications network standard. There was no need to consider factors such as the possibility that GSM would be eliminated by more advanced third-generation communications technology in the future. However, Verizon and Sprint, which were in a tight financial situation, had to carefully consider the cost factors of the technical standards they chose next. Although CDMA technology was not commercially available for the time being, many experimental evidence proved that CDMA had a huge advantage over second-generation digital communication technologies such as GSM in terms of spectrum capacity and network construction cost. Chris patiently waited for Eric to finish reading the information and said, "In addition to CDMA itself, if Firefly shows interest in the telecommunications industry and publicly invests in Qualcomm, it is very likely that Verizon and Sprint will lean towards CDMA. Because with the further expansion of the debt burden of the two companies, whether it is debt financing or equity financing, the difficulty of obtaining funds will be greatly increased. Firefly has abundant funds in its hands that they desperately desire. Even if we do not provide direct financial support to the two companies, they will be inclined to cooperate with Qualcomm, which has the strong backing of Firefly." Eric nodded and leaned back on the sofa. His fingers gently rubbed the information in his hand, but some other thoughts appeared in his mind. No matter which country, the telecommunications industry was monopolized by certain giants. If it had not been for the famous telecommunications anti-monopoly case in 1984, AT&T would have been the company with the highest market value in the United States. Even if it had been split into 7 subsidiaries, AT&T, with a market value of more than $80 billion, was still one of the top 5 corporate giants in the United States. General Electric, which was ranked first, had a market value of more than $90 billion. In the United States, AT&T's monopoly did not occur with administrative support. If AT&T wanted to expand further, it would be restricted by the Federal Anti-Monopoly Department. However, even after a large-scale split, AT&T's monopoly status was difficult to break. After more than 100 years of development, AT&T had a perfect national fixed-line telephone communication network. This network was not only costly, but it could not be easily built in 3 to 5 years. Many emerging companies wanted to develop their own telecommunications business, and most of the time, they even needed to rent communication lines from AT&T. Under such circumstances, it was basically impossible for latecomers to catch up or even surpass AT&T. However, with the arrival of the new wave of technology, 2 important opportunities that could break the industry's pattern appeared: the rise of the mobile telecommunications industry and the internet broadband industry. At present, these 2 industries were in their infancy. Except for Eric, who was a transmigrator, no one knew what scale these 2 industries would develop to in the future. However, Eric knew very well that 20 years later, either the mobile telecommunications or the internet broadband industry would far surpass the fixed-line telephone business that AT&T relied on to maintain its monopoly. Even before Eric's rebirth, many households no longer installed fixed-line telephones. However, mobile phones and broadband had gradually become necessities in people's lives. Although the recent auction of C-tier licenses had been delayed due to the somewhat absurd lawsuit, it indicated that latecomers who wanted to enter the telecommunications industry would still have to face heavy industry barriers, both overt and covert. However, these barriers were nothing to Eric, who already had a huge amount of capital in his hands. In some online gaming terms, he did not need to start from scratch like those newbie accounts in the newbie village. Instead, he could spend money to buy a good high-level account and enjoy the game directly. Moreover, he currently had 2 good game accounts in his hands. Eric knew a little about the future prospects of these 2 companies. Verizon, Sprint, and AT&T would become the 3 giants of the American telecommunications industry in the future. He guessed that this future situation would be caused by the 3 companies, especially Verizon and Sprint, who are now sparing no effort in the mobile telecommunications industry. At this time, other telecommunications companies in the United States that were comparable to Verizon and Sprint, such as BellSouth and Northern Telecom, would also gradually be eliminated or swallowed up by other companies because they missed this important industrial revolution. Moreover, because the payment of spectrum licensing fees and the construction of a nationwide mobile telecommunications network would require a huge amount of capital, now was the best time to invest in these 2 companies. Eric also knew that this should be the final moment. If he missed this opportunity, it would be very difficult for him to get another one. Due to the arrival of the new technology wave, when the Nasdaq index began to soar in the next few years, whether it was Verizon or Sprint, they only needed to issue a small amount of shares in the circulation market to raise enough funds for their development. Therefore, it was impossible for them to bring in a major shareholder like Firefly, who could change the company's equity structure. Even if they were willing, with the skyrocketing market value of the 2 companies, Firefly would not be able to come up with enough funds. Chris saw that Eric had suddenly fallen into deep thought. He waited patiently for a while before asking, "Eric, what are you thinking about?" Eric came back to his senses, waved the documents in his hands, and asked directly, "Chris, between Verizon and Sprint, which one do you think is more likely to accept our investment?" Chris raised his eyebrows. Just as he was about to speak, the intercom near the two of them beeped a few times. Eric got up and pressed the intercom button. The voice of the Manners God came out. "Mr. Williams, Mr. Jacob, and Mr. Salmasai have arrived." Chapter 689. In order to describe in detail the advantages of CDMA over the first-generation FDMA analog signal technology and the second-generation TDMA digital signal technology, we've made a model similar to a cocktail party. If we compare each communication channel of the operator to a cocktail party for social interaction, Owen Jacobs could not wait to promote Qualcomm's CDMA technology to Eric during the meal at the Sharp Corner Manor. The FDMA form of cocktail party allows only two guests to have a one-on-one conversation at a time. The communication efficiency of this technical form is extremely low. The TDMA form of cocktail party allows many guests to take turns to communicate with the other party at the same time. Although it improves the utilization of communication channels, in fact, only one user can be allowed to speak at a time. Our CDMA form of cocktail party completely breaks this limitation. It allows many groups of communication objects to communicate in different languages at the same time. Therefore, with this more efficient utilization of communication bandwidth, the cost of building a mobile communication network using CDMA technology will be far lower than the second-generation digital signal technology. There were 4 men and 3 women sitting on both sides of the long table in the dining room. Eric, Chris, and the others were listening carefully to Owen Jacobs' explanation. Only Xiao Nina seemed a little absent-minded. However, Owen Jacobs' simple description made it easy for her to accept the advantages of CDMA. She looked at Eric, who nodded slightly, blinked, and pretended to be curious. She asked with a serious expression, "Mr. Jacobs, since CDMA is better than, well, the other 2 technologies, why did AT&T choose GSM as the technical standard?" Eric turned his head and glared at Xiao Nina, who was interrupting, but he didn't scold her. Instead, he looked at Owen Jacobs. Owen Jacobs didn't feel awkward at all because of this question. He smiled and explained, "Miss Drew, you paused for a moment just now. You must have some doubts about the term I said. Please allow me to explain it to you. The full name of GSM is the Global Mobile Communication System. It is a more mature digital communication technology developed on the basis of the second-generation TDMA digital technology. There are many reasons why AT&T chose GSM technology. The most important reason is that GSM technology matured earlier than CDMA technology and became commercially available. AT&T has very strong capital and doesn't have to worry about the construction cost of a mobile communication network, so they will choose GSM technology that has been widely promoted. So far, there is no mature commercial network for CDMA technology, which is also our biggest disadvantage. However, Qualcomm has accumulated 10 years of research and development experience in CDMA technology. We are very confident that CDMA technology is now very mature. As long as we can get a commercial opportunity, we can definitely prove the superiority of CDMA to everyone. Owen Jacobs's eyes fell on Eric at the end. Eric didn't immediately satisfy some of Owen Jacobs' expectations. Instead he said, "Owen, do you know Nokia?" Owen Jacobs' expression changed slightly. Of course, he knew about Nokia, a communication equipment and mobile phone manufacturer that rose quickly from the edge of bankruptcy. He said, "If I remember correctly, Nokia's controlling shareholder is an overseas company called the Hawaii Fund, and the Hawaii Fund is an overseas investment fund set up by Firefly Investments." Eric nodded. His purpose of setting up the Hawaii Fund was to avoid the high corporate income tax in the United States by intercepting Nokia's future profits overseas, just like Apple. This method of tax avoidance was completely legal, so Eric didn't deliberately hide the fact that Firefly Investments was actually Nokia's controlling shareholder. Noticing a trace of doubt in Owen Jacobs' expression, Eric could roughly guess what the other party was thinking. Nokia had developed into one of the top communication equipment and mobile phone manufacturers in Europe in the past 2 years. Its strength was second only to Ericsson, but the gap was getting smaller and smaller, and there were even signs of overtaking it. The reason why Nokia rose rapidly in just over 2 years, in addition to the huge development funds injected by Firefly, was that Nokia was ahead of other communication manufacturers in the technical layout of GSM technology and the rapid popularization of GSM technology. GSM technology could be said to be the foundation of Nokia's rise. However, although GSM technology had been widely popularized in Europe and Asia, it was still in the initial stage of development in North America. Although AT&T, the largest telecommunications giant in North America, had identified GSM as its main mobile communication technology standard, the construction of AT&T's GSM network had actually just begun. Therefore, in Owen Jacobs' opinion, what Eric should do now was to assist Nokia in promoting GSM technology in North America and enter the North American market, not to extend an olive branch to GSM Technology's competitor, CDMA. Eric did not wait for Owen Jacobs to ask and took the initiative to explain, "Owen, I know you must have some doubts, but in my opinion, there is no conflict between supporting the development of Qualcomm and Nokia, because GSM and CDMA are two completely different generations of mobile communication technology standards. Qualcomm and Nokia should also be two completely different companies. I even hope that Qualcomm and Nokia can form a close cooperation in the future. We will discuss these in detail in the future. I just mentioned Nokia for another reason. Although Nokia's current development is very rapid, in the second half of last year, Nokia also experienced a very major corporate crisis. Chris knows this better than I do. He has been working on this matter for a long time at the end of last year. Let him say it." Everyone looked at Chris. Although Chris was a little puzzled as to why Eric suddenly mentioned this matter, he still explained, "Before 1992, Nokia only produced a few 100,000 mobile phones a year. However, after 1992, due to the strong market demand brought about by the popularization of GSM technology, Nokia's communication equipment and mobile phone sales have increased exponentially. Last year, Nokia's mobile phone sales alone reached 3.1 million units. The rapidly expanding production demand almost caused the collapse of Nokia's component supply chain. Therefore, Nokia's CEO, Yoma Alala, and I spent a few months at the end of last year to completely rectify Nokia's supply chain to ensure that Nokia's production capacity can meet the continuing expansion of the mobile communication market." Owen Jacobs had been racking his brains to promote CDMA technology, but he had never considered the long-term problem. However, when he heard Chris talk about the crisis Nokia experienced last year, he realized something. Eric also said at this time, "As far as I know, except for some manufacturers who are still producing the first generation of analog signal mobile phones in the market, almost all the digital mobile phones produced by mainstream communication manufacturers are of the GSM standard. Qualcomm has been focusing on technology research and development for the past 10 years, and it does not have much ability to produce CDMA equipment. So, once CDMA technology is selected as the technical standard by any large communication operator, what does Qualcomm plan to use to cope with the sudden market demand of millions of CDMA devices?" Chapter 690. After hearing Eric's question, Owen Jacobs didn't know how to answer for a while. Although Qualcomm had always been generous in licensing CDMA technology, so far, there was no large-scale CDMA equipment manufacturer in the world. When GSM equipment manufacturers were everywhere in the world, even Nokia, which had a strong accumulation of production technology, almost collapsed its supply chain due to the rapidly expanding market demand, let alone Qualcomm, which was almost poor in equipment production capacity. In fact, Qualcomm had its own communication equipment and mobile phone factory, but most of the equipment produced in that factory was only used to meet the testing needs of CDMA technology. Nokia had its own supply chain to collapse, but Qualcomm's factory didn't even have a complete component supply chain. It often only purchased a small number of components according to demand. This situation couldn't support large-scale CDMA equipment production. It was conceivable that if the situation continued, Even if those large telecommunications operators deliberately chose CDMA as their mobile communication technology standard, they would definitely turn to GSM technology again if they couldn't get enough CDMA communication equipment to build a mobile communication network. Seeing that Owen Jacobs didn't speak, Aaron Salmasai, who was sitting next to him, eagerly took the initiative to explain, "Eric, the manufacturing difficulty of communication equipment is mainly the design and development of the core chip. In this regard, Qualcomm already has a very mature product. As long as CDMA technology can be promoted, Qualcomm can not only quickly build a factory to produce equipment in a short time, but also commission communication equipment manufacturers to do product manufacturing." Eric nodded with a smile and didn't raise any objections. The main reason he said those words just now was to draw out Aaron Salmasai's words at this time. It was true that technology research and development burned money, but in fact, the construction and operation of equipment manufacturing factories were more expensive. The $420 million that Nokia received from Firefly and the profits in the past 2 years were basically invested in the expansion of its factories. Qualcomm's main business after more than 10 years was not the production of communication equipment and mobile phones, but mainly focused on patent licensing and chip research and development. Eric knew these, but guiding Qualcomm to this path at this time was not in the interest of Firefly. Because if Qualcomm was not involved in the product manufacturing field, there was no need for large-scale equity and debt financing. It would be difficult for Firefly to obtain a large number of Qualcomm shares with capital advantage. Through the communication at the dining table, both parties had roughly determined their respective intentions. After lunch, Eric, Chris, and Kelly brought Owen Jacobs and Alan Salmasai to the study, and the two sides officially opened up to each other. Eric handed an equity document to Owen Jacobs and Aaron Salmasai, and said, "I have noticed Qualcomm since last year, and I am very optimistic about CDMA technology. During this time, Firefly has successively acquired 1 million shares of Qualcomm shares. We will report to the SEC and Qualcomm's board of directors in the near future. In order to show Firefly's sincerity in cooperation, I will inform you of this matter first." Owen Jacobs and Aaron Salmasai only flipped open the document symbolically and then looked at each other. They could almost see the disappointment in each other's eyes at the same time. Qualcomm had long realized that someone was buying Qualcomm shares from the recent abnormal fluctuations in the company's stock price. The board of directors and management originally thought that someone had gotten the inside information that the CDMA technology was about to be confirmed as the technical standard by large telecommunications operators, so they took the opportunity to enter the market and make a lot of money after the relevant facts were made public. Qualcomm only issued 30% of the tradable shares, so the board of directors was not worried about losing control of the company. Instead, they were quite excited because of this speculation and made some relevant preparations for it. Unexpectedly, the mystery was suddenly revealed now. The facts had nothing to do with the original speculation. CDMA was not internally confirmed by any telecommunications operator. The disappointment of the two could be imagined. However, after a brief disappointment, Owen Jacobs and Aaron Salmasai remembered Eric's identity again, and their mood improved. At least, the person who secretly bought Qualcomm shares was not a stock speculator, but a billionaire like Eric who was really interested in Qualcomm. As long as he could spare no effort to use his capital and influence to help promote CDMA technology, Qualcomm was very likely to get out of the current predicament. Of course, although he had been focusing on technology research and development, Owen Jacobs would never naively think that the 1 million shares Firefly already held could satisfy Firefly's appetite. This stake only accounted for 5% of Qualcomm's total share capital. He said, "Eric, since Firefly has done so much preparation work, I think you must have a detailed plan, right?" Eric nodded and said, "So far, no large telecommunications operator is willing to adopt CDMA technology as the technical standard of its mobile communication network. This is the main dilemma facing Qualcomm. Firefly can use the resources, media channels, and capital advantages in its hands as much as possible to help Qualcomm promote CDMA technology. However, at the same time, Qualcomm also needs to immediately solve the problem of its inability to mass-produce CDMA equipment. I don't want to see Firefly spend a lot of effort to get carriers to accept CDMA technology, only to move to the GSM camp again because CDMA equipment can't be supplied in time. Therefore, I suggest that Qualcomm immediately build a communication equipment and mobile phone factory from now on. Compared to Owen Jacobs, who focused on technology research and development, Aaron Salmasai put more energy into the actual management of Qualcomm. When he heard the first half of Eric's words, he was just a little excited, but because of the second half of Eric's words, he was distressed. He interrupted, "Eric, it's not that we haven't considered this aspect. We have also done detailed research. According to the original research results, building a factory with an annual output of 1 million CDMA mobile phones would require a total investment of $80 million. We can't, Speaking of this, Aaron Salmasai noticed that Eric was looking at him with a smile, and suddenly realized something. He stopped talking and smiled awkwardly. Eric didn't mind Aaron Salmasai's interruption. He continued with a smile, "I know that Qualcomm definitely can't afford to build an equipment factory, but this money can be paid by Firefly. To be honest, Firefly helps Qualcomm promote CDMA technology, and we also hope to get enough returns. Therefore, I hope to increase Firefly's shareholding in Qualcomm through capital injection." Owen Jacobs had just realized this and asked, "Eric, how much money is Firefly going to invest in Qualcomm?" Eric said in a relaxed tone, "According to what Aaron just said, a mobile phone factory requires an investment of $80 million. Qualcomm definitely needs to build a CDMA base station equipment factory at the same time. This investment is also $80 million, which is $160 million. The investment of only 2 factories is definitely not enough. Qualcomm also needs to establish a component procurement and product marketing system. Then, this expenditure is counted as $200 million. According to the current stock price, Qualcomm probably needs to issue 10 million shares to Firefly." Owen Jacobs did a mental calculation. If 10 million shares were issued, Qualcomm's total share capital would expand to 30 million shares. Firefly already held 1 million shares. By then, its shareholding in Qualcomm would increase to 40%. Although it did not achieve the controlling stake, Firefly would also become the most important shareholder of Qualcomm. In order to establish Qualcomm, Owen Jacobs had invested almost all his wealth. However, after many rounds of financing and the IPO in 1992, Owen Jacobs' Qualcomm shares were less than 1%. As long as Qualcomm could continue to survive, Owen Jacobs did not care much about the company's equity changes. He also knew that Firefly could not get enough shares and would certainly not do its best to help Qualcomm promote CDMA technology. After thinking for a moment, he nodded and said, "Eric, I don't object to your proposal, but it involves additional shares. This matter will be decided by Qualcomm's board of directors." AT&T's announcement of joining the GSM camp had caused Qualcomm to lose more than half of its potential North American market. If Verizon, Sprint, and other companies also chose GSM, Qualcomm could only go bankrupt and liquidate. Firefly had bet a huge sum of $200 million on Qualcomm at this time. If it failed, the $200 million would be wasted. Eric believed that Qualcomm's board of directors should understand that Firefly's actions were equivalent to indicating that the entire Firefly system would spare no effort to promote Qualcomm's CDMA technology. Although the final capital injection plan would be adjusted, the possibility of Qualcomm's board of directors rejecting Firefly's capital injection was very low. Looking at his watch, Eric said, "So, Owen, Chris and Kelly will be in charge of the specific matters. I hope to hear good news from Qualcomm as soon as possible." Owen Jacobs was about to say something when he felt Aaron Salmasai gently kick his shoe. He suddenly remembered the plan that they discussed yesterday and said, "Eric, Aaron and I have another plan here. I hope you can take a look." Eric nodded and took the document that Owen Jacobs took out from his briefcase. After reading it carefully, he passed it to Chris and Kelly who were next to him. Owen Jacobs and Aaron Salmasai looked at the 3 people in front of them nervously. They were worried that Eric would directly reject the plan. After waiting for a while, Chris and Kelly finished reading the document. They then looked at Eric and did not make any suggestions. A huge plan involving $4 billion needed Eric to make the decision himself. Eric thought for a while and said, "I think this plan is a bit idealistic." When Owen Jacobs and Aaron Salmasai heard Eric's words, their heartstrings relaxed. At least, Eric did not reject the plan on the spot. Eric did not know what the two were thinking. He continued, "You must know about the lawsuit regarding the C-tier licenses. The reason for the lawsuit is very absurd, but it can still delay the auction of the C-tier licenses for a long time. From this point, it can be seen that the established telecom operators will not allow the small and medium-sized telecom companies to develop. Even if we buy all the C-tier licenses, the final users will still be AT&T and a few other telecom giants. Perhaps before the C-tier licenses are auctioned, these mainstream telecom operators have already determined the technical standards. So, this plan is not very meaningful for the promotion of CDMA." Owen Jacobs and Aaron Salmasai realized that Eric did not say anything definite. They waited patiently for him to continue. Eric did not keep them in suspense. He said, "However, this plan can be our last move. If the next mainstream telecom operators do not choose CDMA technology, Firefly can start this plan and buy all the C-tier licenses. Then, we can buy a telecom operator and build our own CDMA communication network." At this point, Eric looked up at the two and smiled. "Of course, the premise of all this is that our cooperation can be achieved smoothly. Otherwise, Firefly will not waste money on CDMA technology." Aaron Salmasai suppressed his emotions and asked, "Eric, you mean, as long as Qualcomm accepts Firefly's investment, you will agree to implement this plan?" Eric shook his head and smiled. "I just said that this will be Firefly's best move. If we become a major shareholder of Qualcomm, Firefly will first choose to promote CDMA technology to established telecom operators such as Verizon. Firefly will only start this plan if these mainstream operators do not accept CDMA." When he heard Eric's words, Owen Jacobs was far more excited than Aaron Salmasai. CDMA was the result of his 10 years of hard work. In any case, Owen Jacobs hoped that CDMA could continue and not be quietly squeezed to death by GSM and other technologies. "Eric, can I understand it this way? As long as Firefly becomes a major shareholder of Qualcomm, you will never give up on CDMA technology?" Eric nodded without hesitation. Even if GSM really dominated the world, the technology would eventually be upgraded. The 3G communication technologies such as WCDMA and TDCDMA in his previous life could not bypass the CDMA standard. Therefore, even if CDMA was temporarily defeated in this industrial upgrade, it would still be profitable to take over Qualcomm, who owned a large number of CDMA patents. Owen Jacobs was still a little worried. He said, "Eric, can Qualcomm get a written endorsement of this promise from Firefly?" "Yes." Eric nodded again. Then, Owen Jacobs stood up and extended his hand to Eric, who also stood up. "I will give you the good news as soon as possible." It was already evening by the time they saw Owen Jacobs and Selena off. Eric and the others returned to the villa's glass wall and sat down. They looked at the magnificent sunset sea view outside the glass wall. Chris asked, "Eric, do you really plan to buy all the C-tier licenses with $4 billion US? Eric took the freshly charged coffee from Kelly and smiled. "I said, this is a last resort plan. Instead of buying the C-tier licenses, I would prefer to use the $4 billion US to invest in either Verizon or Sprint." Eric brought up the topic that they were discussing before Owen Jacobs and Kelly arrived in the morning. Chris said, "I'm afraid this is not going to be easy. Compared to high-cost equity financing, the old telecom operators prefer debt financing. However, the current needs of these two companies are very large, so your idea is not impossible. If you are sure to do this, I will start work on this as soon as possible." Eric nodded decisively. "Let's talk to them based on the $4 billion US investment. As long as I can get the shares of the two companies, I don't mind taking a little loss in terms of price." Chris smiled and said, $4 billion US is too difficult. It's already good enough that they are willing to accept Firefly's $2 billion US investment. $4 billion US was equivalent to 40% of Sprint shares. Even if Verizon was twice the size of Sprint, $4 billion was enough to buy 20% of Verizon's shares. Eric was also aware of the difficulty of this. He said, "Just do your best." While they were chatting, Drew and Emily walked in with big and small bags. The twins behind them were also carrying a lot of things. It was obvious that the two girls had gone shopping in the afternoon. Walking over, Emily looked at her boyfriend's shocked expression and put down the plastic bag in her hand before she explained, "These are all Drew's things. I only bought a few of them, and they're all in the car." The girl immediately laughed and said, Yes, it's just a few. It might be a little big. The trunk and the back seat are all stuffed." After teasing each other for a while, Chris and Emily were about to get up and leave. Eric did not ask them to stay. He walked them out of the villa. When they got into the car, he asked, "When do you plan to go back to New York?" Chris did not answer. He only looked at Emily. Emily explained, "Victoria's Secret has been shooting commercials in Los Angeles. Also, Cindy will be attending the Golden Globe Awards ceremony. We will probably leave after the Golden Globe Awards ceremony." Eric said, "Why did the Golden Globe Awards only invite Cindy Crawford?" The Golden Globe Awards originally wanted the five of them to present the Best Original Score award together, but then we received an invitation from the Oscar committee. They wanted the five of them to go on stage together. Between the Golden Globe Awards and the Oscars, of course we would choose the latter. Then the Golden Globe Awards took a step back and only invited Cindy. Emily said and got into the car. Then she poked her head out and said, "By the way, Eric, if you are free in the next 2 days, help me take a look at the effects of the Victoria's Secret commercial. We are doing post-production at Firefly Studios." "No problem. I will probably be there for the next few days. You can contact me at any time." After seeing Chris and Emily off, Kelly also took the initiative to leave. Back in the villa, the girl went into the room to check on the results of today's shopping. Eric sat on the sofa by the curtain wall and carefully sorted out everything that had happened today. The sun had completely sunk below the horizon, and the light gradually dimmed. After some time, he sensed a tall and slender figure walking over quietly. Eric raised his head and looked at Natasha's beautiful face. He gestured for her to turn on the nearby lights. Natasha quietly walked to the wall and turned on the lights. She said softly, "Master, dinner is ready." Eric nodded. Just as he got up, he remembered something and asked, "Where is the package that Chris brought me this morning?" Natasha said, "It's in the bookcase in the living room. Send it to the study after dinner." "Okay." Chapter 691. San Diego, where Qualcomm's headquarters was located, was in Southern California, less than 2 hours' drive from Los Angeles. It was very convenient. After Eric expressed his intention to invest in Qualcomm to Owen Jacobs, the two sides began close negotiations. In Eric's office at Firefly Studios, Kelly, who had just returned from San Diego, handed a memo to Eric and said, "Chris will be negotiating with several important shareholders of Qualcomm in the afternoon. He asked me to come back first. This is the result of our negotiations in the morning. Qualcomm's board of directors is only willing to accept half of the investment amount we proposed, but their attitude is not so firm. It should only be a matter of time before the deal is finalized." Eric opened the memo Kelly handed over and said, "Since we have officially started to contact them, this matter can't be hidden for too long. It's inevitable that something will happen if we delay it for too long. The only thing I care about is time. 1 week. I hope this deal can be finalized in the next week." Kelly said, "Eric, if the negotiations are compressed into a week, we will definitely be in a passive position." Eric shook his head and said, "This matter can't be resolved quickly. If it attracts too much attention, we will really be in a passive position. You continue to go to San Diego tomorrow and explain the pros and cons to Qualcomm." AT&T announced GSM as its technical standard as soon as it got the Spectrum license. The other operators who have gotten the Spectrum license will not hesitate for too long. If they miss the best time to lobby for CDMA because of their hesitation, we will not hesitate to give up on this deal. So, only 1 week. Once the news of Firefly's attempt to invest in Qualcomm spread, not only would it cause the stock price to skyrocket, but it might also cause people to follow suit. After all, Firefly's investments in Cisco, AOL, Yahoo, Nokia, and other companies in recent years were now very profitable. The capital market had already begun to pay close attention to Firefly's investment. If the negotiations dragged on for too long, and another company suddenly appeared in the process, it would be the biggest trouble. Kelly thought for a moment and nodded. Okay, I will prepare. Eric finished reading the memo and discussed some things to take note of with Kelly. He then picked up a thick package from his desk and stood up. The Wachowskis will be here soon. You can come along too. Kelly caught up with him and asked in surprise, Eric, are you really going to let them direct The Matrix? Eric said, It's not confirmed yet. Let's meet first. I still feel that this matter is a little too ridiculous. They are just two unknown screenwriters. Eric laughed and said, I was once just a little-known screenwriter. Kelly said, But you didn't direct a movie with such a huge budget right from the start. The budget for Home Alone was only $1 million. After that, there were Pretty Woman, Home Alone 2, Dark Battle, and Ghost. It was only until the sixth movie, Tornado, that you started trying to make a big-budget movie. Eric explained, At that time, I was a little timid. If I directly made a big project with an investment of over $100 million and the box office failed miserably, I would not be where I am now. Kelly was still a little confused. From the way Eric had directed from small to big, he had always been a very rational person. But this time, his behavior seemed a little irrational. Because of the great success of Jurassic Park, Firefly had high expectations for Eric's movie adaptation of The Matrix. The production budget was directly set at $100 million USD. Katzenberg and the others actually hoped that Eric would continue to direct personally, but Eric was interested in two Hollywood rookies who had not even directed a movie before. This was really puzzling. It was still the small restaurant near the administrative building where Eric often had lunch. As soon as he entered, the two brothers who were already waiting in the restaurant stood up, accompanied by an employee of the studio. Eric sent the employee in charge of accompanying them away and sat down opposite the Wachowskis with Kelly. Looking at the Wachowskis who were still men, Eric inexplicably had a strange feeling. Perhaps it was because of the cultural differences, Eric could not understand the thoughts of transsexuals. Feeling Eric's gaze, Larry, who looked thin and wore glasses, but was actually the older brother, looked at the package that Eric casually placed on the table and said, Mr. Williams, what do you think of our idea of The Matrix? Eric put away his strange thoughts and took out the storyboard drafts from the package. He said, You can call me Eric. I think the ideas of bullet time and 360-degree rotation in your drafts are very cool. However, I feel that you did not completely adapt the movie according to my novel, but these drafts also did not give a detailed script. Can you tell me your specific thoughts on the plot first? In order to avoid a clash of ideas, Eric's novel version of The Matrix didn't take the route of the movie version in his memory except for the name and the main plot. It also didn't have any profound philosophical thinking. Instead, it was mainly about the hero Neo, who accidentally discovered that he was living in an illusory world and fought against the mother with his friends to return to reality. Hearing Eric's question, Larry said, Eric, Andy and I actually had similar ideas in the past, but they were just scattered pieces. It was only when we saw your novel that we decided to turn our story into a screenplay. So, the storyboard drafts you see are the result of Andy and I combining your novel and some of our own ideas. We feel that compared to the novel version, this story should be able to be explored on a deeper level. It should be about reality and illusion, about the origin of life and so on. It shouldn't just be a science fiction novel. Eric nodded and said, Then, let's put my story aside and talk about your ideas, shall we? Of course not, Larry Wachowski said. Here's what we're thinking. In the illusion created by the mother body, Neo was probably a programmer who was proficient in hacking. One day, a mysterious person suddenly contacted him. The Wachowski brothers excitedly began to talk about their ideas for the story. Eric interjected from time to time, and unknowingly, even Kelly was gradually drawn into the discussion. It wasn't until 2 o'clock in the afternoon that they remembered to have lunch. After filling their stomachs, Eric began to ask the Wachowski brothers about their specific ideas for the movie. The discussion went on until evening, and the Wachowski brothers finally left Firefly Studios. Eric asked the waiter to remove the coffee on the table and ordered dinner. Then, he asked Kelly, who was beside him, "What do you think of them?" Kelly thought for a moment and said, "They're two very creative people. However, if we shoot according to their ideas, the movie might be a little obscure. If it's made into a low-budget cult movie, it might become a classic. But as a big production with hundreds of millions of investment, it's hard to guarantee the box office." Eric nodded. The female assistant's eyes were very sharp. In the original Spacetime, in order to attract investment for The Matrix, the Wachowski brothers were very restrained when it came to the script. They just happened to combine the philosophical thinking and commercial elements that they wanted to express. Therefore, the audience saw a cool sci-fi blockbuster that didn't lack in content. The first film of The Matrix was released and immediately caused a sensation. Not only did it have a good reputation at the box office, but it also made the Wachowski brothers, who were originally unknown, a first-tier director in Hollywood. There was a very simple and crude rule in Hollywood. As long as you could make a movie that sold well at the box office, you could get everything you wanted. Therefore, after the success of the first film, the brothers became first-tier directors in Hollywood and gained full control over the production of the sequel. The producer, Warner, also agreed to the brothers' requests. Therefore, the brothers began to add their own ideas into the movie without restraint. While the sequel unscrupulously used special effects, the plot also became dark and obscure. The disastrous result of this extreme disharmony was that after 4 years of anxiously waiting, the fans finally saw 2 dog-eared sequels. After the second film, Reload, basically destroyed the series' reputation, the fans directly poured their disappointment on the third film. This made the final film, which was supposed to be the series' peak, become the series' worst movie in terms of box office and reputation. Recalling these things, Eric said to the female assistant, "I will personally check the script. I will definitely not let them do as they please." Eric, but after all, they do not have any experience in directing. According to the rough schedule of film production, if everything goes well, The Matrix will take about 3 months of shooting and 4 months of post-production. The pre-production will take about 3 months of preparation, so it will add up to less than a year. We still have a year and a half between now and next year's summer break. In the future, the publicity and post-production can be done at the same time. If the time is tight, maybe we can let them use this half a year to direct a low-budget film to practice. Eric nodded. That's a good idea. A year and a half. A year and a half, 18 months, 6 months, 1995, 1997. Kelly saw Eric's expression change continuously as he spoke, and he strangely muttered to himself. She stood up worriedly. "Eric, what's wrong?" Eric calmed down and forced a smile. He reached out and patted Kelly's little hand on his shoulder. "I'm fine. I just suddenly thought of something." "Are you really okay?" Kelly was still a little worried. She placed the back of her hand on Eric's forehead again. Other than some fine sweat, she did not feel anything strange. Eric smiled as he grabbed the female assistant's little hand and kissed it. "I'm really fine. I just suddenly thought that I might have overlooked something." After being kissed by Eric on the back of her hand, Kelly felt the surprised gaze of the waiter not far away. She blushed slightly and withdrew her little hand. She sat down again, but she forgot to ask Eric why he had lost his composure just now. Eric's expression quickly returned to normal, but he did not let go of the thought just now. Because of Kelly's inadvertent reminder, Eric suddenly thought of the production cycle of Titanic. In the original Spacetime, after Titanic created a box office miracle, many production details were dug out by the media. Eric clearly remembered that in the original Spacetime, Titanic in the original Spacetime began preparations in the second half of 1995. The official filming began in 1996. Fox originally planned to release it in the summer of 1997, but Cameron delayed the production cycle again and again. In the end, it was delayed until the end of 1997 before it could be released. The entire production cycle was close to 2 years. Although the production budget for Titanic was approved at the beginning of the production cycle of $150 million, Eric was already mentally prepared that Cameron would definitely overspend. However, as long as it could bring about the same classic as the original Spacetime, Eric did not mind Cameron pushing the budget up to $200 million again. However, he inadvertently neglected the fact that not only would Cameron overspend on the budget, but he would also overspend on the production cycle. Due to the auction of Disney's hand-drawn animation department last year, Firefly's annual animated film schedule was going to be interrupted next summer. If Titanic was not released as scheduled, Firefly's only summer release in 1996 would be The Matrix. In the past few years, the profits generated by Firefly's summer season movies accounted for about half of the annual movie business profits. This showed the importance of the summer season to Firefly's movie business department. If the scale of next year's summer movies suddenly shrank to 1/3 of the previous year, Firefly's movie business would inevitably be greatly affected. For this kind of thing, keeping a close eye on Cameron would definitely not have any effect. In the end, it would only make him roar a little louder on the set. Eric quickly made up his mind. It was better to prepare in advance. Moreover, fortunately, it was only the beginning of 1995. If he realized this in the second half of the year, it would definitely be too late to prepare a film that could carry the 1996 summer season. Under Eric's personal decision, the director of The Matrix was quickly confirmed to be the Wachowskis. Eric also followed Kelly's suggestion and asked the Wachowskis to shoot a low-budget film in advance during the early preparation stage of The Matrix to hone their directing skills. The Wachowskis were screenwriters, and they happened to have a script called Wild Flowers that they wrote themselves. However, the script had been sold to an independent production company affiliated with Warner Brothers, and with Eric's personal coordination and Firefly's agreement to co-invest, Warner Brothers readily agreed to hand over the directing rights to the Wachowskis. The negotiations with Qualcomm continued, and the news inevitably leaked in the next few days. Several major telecommunications operators expressed their close attention, and even AT&T's senior executives called through Warren Buffett to ask Eric's intentions. Although Qualcomm's share price skyrocketed, under Firefly's tough attitude, Qualcomm shareholders and board of directors gradually began to compromise. In Hollywood, the Golden Globe Awards ceremony was imminent. Eric paid little attention to this matter. In order to prevent Cameron's Titanic from being delayed and not having a film to release next summer, Eric began to busy himself with a selection of scripts. Mr. Williams, the story goes like this. An officer of the Marine Corps led his subordinates to seize a batch of gas bombs because he was dissatisfied with the American government's treatment of the dead soldiers. He also took a group of tourists hostage on a prison island that had been converted into a tourist attraction. He used this to threaten the American government to pay a ransom of $100 million to compensate the dead soldiers. The abandoned prison was once called Devil's Island, and was known for its tight security. In the process of rescuing the hostages, the FBI discovered that a former British agent was the only criminal who had successfully escaped from Devil's Island, so the FBI executives lied to the agent that he would be blackmailed by the American government on the premise that he led special forces into Devil's Island to rescue the hostages. In Firefly Studios, in Eric's office, a thin middle-aged man described his script idea to Eric and made some gestures from time to time. Eric listened quietly, but Jerry Bruckheimer, who was sitting on the other side, kept nodding. When the middle-aged man finished, he said, "Eric, what do you think of David's idea? It's great, isn't it?" Eric smiled non-committally and said to the thin middle-aged man, "Mr. Weisberg, you can go back first. If there is a result, someone will inform you." The skinny middle-aged man looked at Jerry Bruckheimer and said to Eric, "Mr. Williams, you can imagine that the role of the old British agent will be played by Sean Connery, and the first 007 will play the role of the British agent. It's very gimmicky. The chemistry expert can be given to Nicolas Cage, and the director can be John Woo. His directing style is very suitable for this script. If it's shot with this kind of style, the movie will definitely be a hit." And Eric still did not say anything. Jerry Bruckheimer frowned impatiently and said, "David, listen to Eric. You can go back first. I will call you in the afternoon." David Weisberg felt Jerry Bruckheimer's displeasure and did not dare to pester him anymore. He got up and left the office. When the office door was closed, Jerry Bruckheimer said to Eric, "Eric, can you tell me your thoughts now?" "Jerry," Eric spread his hands and said with a smile, "you know my rules. I don't want the incident of the throat-cut island script to happen again." Knowing that Eric was looking for a script, in just a few days, Firefly received a large number of scripts from the script agent. However, learning from the past, in order to send the script to Eric, the script owner had to sign a strict intent contract with Firefly. After confirming that Eric had chosen the scriptwriter would not be greedy and sell the script to other film companies at a high price. Today, Jerry Bruckheimer suddenly came to him with a scriptwriter and said that he had a good idea to recommend to him. Thus, the situation just now happened. Jerry Bruckheimer said, "Of course I know, and I also think that the incident was originally a trap that you set for Michael Eisner. Am I right?" Eric shrugged. Even if everyone guessed it, he would not admit it. Jerry Bruckheimer smiled knowingly and then explained, "I have bought this script, so don't worry. As long as Firefly agrees to invest, there will be no problems. Jerry, you all seem to have overlooked a problem. So far, I still don't know the name of this script." I neglected that, but the name of the movie at the stage of the script is often undecided. Of course, David has already given this story a name. It's called Life-Ending Island. "Well, Life-Ending Island," Eric repeated and said with a smile. David Weisberg just said that Sean Connery, Nicolas Cage, John Woo, and you, the gold producer. In that case, have you calculated the budget of the film? Eric did not know how much Sean Connery's salary was in Life-Ending Island in the original spacetime, but he happened to know that Sean Connery got his first $20 million salary in The Sky Stealing Trap. Even if it was lower now, it would not be too low. Cage's current salary was also about $15 million. John Woo had directed 3 blockbuster films, and the director's salary was also not less than $10 million. Jerry Bruckheimer, the gold producer, definitely could not do without $10 million. Then, just the salary of the main producer of this film would not be less than $50 million. Jerry Bruckheimer calculated for a moment and said, "Eric, the cost of the lead actor in this film is a little high, but the film does not have many special effects and big scenes, so the budget should be able to be controlled within $80 million." Eric did not know how much box office Life-Ending Island had earned, but this film was one of the first batch of imported films in China at that time, so the box office in North America and the global box office should not be too bad. Eric tapped on the armrest of his chair and thought for a moment, then nodded and said, "Okay, Jerry, only $80 million. And Firefly does not have the habit of signing a salary bonus agreement, so this $80 million is all the production expenses." When Jerry Bruckheimer reported this budget, he actually raised it a little. According to his estimate, the film could probably be completed with $75 million. Eric was not like the senior executives of the film companies he had worked with, who deliberately took away a main producer or reduced the budget by $10 to $20 million to give the producer a hard time, which made him feel very comfortable. He nodded and said, "No problem, Eric, I am quite familiar with Sean Connery. I can help to persuade him to join this project. As for Cage and John Woo, you'd better personally say hello." The two discussed the project in detail. Jerry Bruckheimer was about to leave when Eric joked, "Jerry, in the past few days, people who come into this office have left 1 or 2 script ideas. You're not planning to leave just like that, are you?" Jerry Bruckheimer laughed and remembered that he did not have any urgent matters to attend to. Eric said so he sat down again, crossed his legs, and said casually, "I do have a script here, but it's a little old-fashioned. It's a crime action film that imitates the 2 police male leads in Lethal Weapon. I originally planned to sell it to Columbia for a little money, and the budget is only $19 million. Are you interested in hearing it?" Eric narrowed his eyes slightly and said with the same smile, "Oh, what's the name of the script?" "Jedi Cop." Chapter 692. The outline of the script is about a pair of detective partners with different personalities who accidentally switch identities in front of an important witness while investigating a case. In order to win the trust of the witness, they have to switch identities during the subsequent investigation. Jerry Bruckheimer didn't notice the subtle change in Eric's expression. Compared with David Weisberg, who was a little long-winded when introducing Fatal Island, Bruckheimer skillfully summarized the story in a simple and clear way. The simple details also showed the huge gap between a gold medal producer and an ordinary screenwriter. That's a good idea. The two detective partnership has been proven to be very successful in Lethal Weapon and Beverly Hills Detective. The selling point of switching identities also adds an element of innovation to the story. Jerry, have you chosen a director? When Bruckheimer heard Eric's words, he couldn't help but sit up straight and ask, Eric, you're not interested in this story, are you? In the original Spacetime, Michael Bay and Will Smith, two heavyweights in Hollywood, became famous. Although it was only a low-budget crime film, it was enough to prove how outstanding it was. Of course, Eric wouldn't let it go. He nodded and said, why not? This story is very attractive, and the cost is not high. Maybe it can achieve unexpected results. Bruckheimer put away his chatty expression and became serious. He answered Eric's question. You know, the Jurassic Park 2 project has just been completed. I've only recently made time to prepare for the next stage of the work. I got the script last year and showed it to Firefly Studios. They felt that there were too many similar films, so they didn't pass it. I didn't intend to hand this script to you. Contact with Columbia has just begun. Now, except for the budget, there's no director, actors and so on. Firefly's film business was mainly handled by several major studios. Except for a few key films each year, Eric personally decided and supervised the production, but other low-budget films were not paid much attention to by Eric. Hearing that the script had been rejected by Firefly, Eric did not have any dissatisfaction with the production department, and Bruckheimer did not blame Firefly for being blind. Being in Hollywood, everyone knew very well that the person in charge of the film studio had to select a few dozen to 20 films from a large number of scripts to shoot every year. It was impossible to be 100% sure of the potential of all the scripts. Many Hollywood films that had a bumpy production process but eventually proved to be a hit were basically passed around by all the film studios in the early stages. Moreover, if it weren't for the memories of his previous life, Eric might have thought that this script was too cliché. Even two of the most famous series, Lethal Weapon and Beverly Hills Detective, had already made a bunch of sequels, not to mention those that had been lost in obscurity. How about this? Forget about the collaboration with Columbia. I think we can think about this project and put it at the end of the year. Firefly has only confirmed a Christmas release, 101 Dalmatians. Maybe we can put this film on Thanksgiving. Eric, Thanksgiving release? Are you kidding? Bruckheimer said in surprise. He originally expected that for such a low-budget crime action film, it would be good enough to get an Easter release. Even if it was put in the cold autumn release, it would not be surprising. The summer release and New Year's release were not considered at all. Of course not, Eric said. However, I haven't seen the script yet, so this is just a preliminary idea. In the end, it still depends on the quality of the film after production. If the idea is good but the film is bad, then there will definitely be no Thanksgiving release. Bruckheimer said, I'll call someone and have the script sent over. Eric looked at his watch and said, That's good, but I have something else to do next. If the script is sent over, I can only read it at night. Bruckheimer was not in a hurry. Of course, you take your time. I'll prepare for Brave into Deadly Island first. Let's talk about it when we have time. After sending Bruckheimer away, Eric was still thinking about this matter. The Brave into Deadly Island and Jedi Cop he encountered today were both directed by Michael Bay in the original Spacetime. It seemed that it was time to bring the explosive Bay to Hollywood. In the original Spacetime, although Michael Bay had always been ridiculed as the explosive Bay and was one of the most hated directors of bad films by film critics, in fact, Michael Bay was the darling of the Hollywood studio. This was mainly because Michael Bay had never been profound. He shot commercial films wholeheartedly. Not only could most of his films bring profits to the studio, but what was even rarer was that he never exceeded the production budget and shooting cycle. He gave people the feeling of an alternative Hollywood office worker. Thinking of Michael Bay, his thoughts naturally could not avoid Transformers. Eric suddenly realized that the copyright of this super blockbuster series with unlimited potential had not been obtained yet. However, the fame of Transformers was too big. If he wanted to get the copyright, it would definitely take some twists and turns. Just as he wrote these things down one by one in his work memo, Eric heard someone knocking on the office door. Then Emily poked her head in. "Eric, it's been a few days. You're not going to stand me up again this time, are you?" Eric put away the memo, got up and smiled at Emily, who was standing at the door. "You don't have to be so ruthless. You even used the trick of blocking the door. You still dare to say that? I just asked you to help me watch the commercial and you can delay it for so long." Eric walked out with Emily and said, "For your matter, I've turned down all my appointments this afternoon, but there are always situations that can't be avoided. It's not like you don't know how busy I've been recently. Other than the death postcards and rattlesnakes, I've been like the male lead in Robert Altman's The Big Player. 135 calls a day. If I persist for a year, it'll be 50,000 calls." Emily obviously had not watched The Big Player. She curled her lips and said, "How can it be so many?" Eric looked at Emily and smiled. "If it's just helping you watch the Victoria's Secret commercial, you can just bring the videotape to my office. You insist on me going to the post-production studio. Do you have other plans? Tell me in advance. Otherwise, I won't cooperate when the time comes." A guilty expression flashed across Emily's face, but she quickly said righteously, "Shouldn't a smart man pretend to be confused at the right time? That's Chris's obligation. I can't control it." "I didn't have any expectations for you," Emily said. "It's like this. We found a candidate director for this year's Victoria's Secret show. He's very good at commercials and MTV production. He's also won some professional awards. We've only worked together on one commercial and haven't decided whether to give him the Victoria's Secret show. So, I wanted you to help me watch it." Eric shook his head and smiled. "No, I think the truth should be like this. He wants to change his career to film, but he lacks connections in Hollywood. You want him to produce the Victoria's Secret show, so you sold me out." Emily had a helpless expression on her face. All right. I admit that you're a little smarter than Chris. Is that okay?" Eric stopped joking and said seriously, "Let's make it clear first. It's just a meeting. I can't guarantee anything. If you promise anything in advance, you'll have to deal with it yourself. I'm not stupid. How can I give a promise in advance? Moreover, creating an opportunity to meet you is the dream of many people. He won't be stupid enough to ask for anything else." "Oh, it seems so. I'm a big shot now." Eric shrugged and asked, "What's the guy's name?" "Michael Bay." "Oh. Eric had just nodded, but he subconsciously raised his voice. His tone was full of unconcealable surprise. "Michael Bay. What's wrong?" "Nothing. I think I've heard of him somewhere," Eric explained, but he sighed in his heart. "Is today the day of the explosion?" In the original space-time, Michael Bay used to be the director of Victoria's Secret commercials. The female lead of Transformers 3 was born in the Victoria's Secret Angel. After Emily's introduction, Eric learned that Michael Bay was a little famous in the MTV and advertising circles at this time. He had won a series of MTV and advertising awards. However, even if an MTV or advertising director reached the pinnacle, his position in the industry was far less than that of a film director. Even the position of a TV series director was not as good. Just like stage actors and TV series actors would sharpen their minds to enter the big screen, there were few MTV or advertising directors who did not want to become film directors. The most successful people in Hollywood in this regard were Michael Bay and David Fincher. Firefly Cineplex's post-production center. Eric saw Michael Bay's advertising work for the first time in the viewing room. With the long-term training in the MTV and advertising industry, Michael Bay had developed a strong personal style in color control, rapid camera movement, and lens editing. Moreover, as long as you watched Michael Bay's movies, you would know that he was very good at showing the curvaceous beauty of the female body. The scene of Megan Fox leaning over the hood of the Bumblebee in Transformers was a scene that almost all male audiences loved to talk about. Cooperating with Victoria's Secret for the bra commercial was simply a match made in heaven. After watching the 1 minute and 30 seconds commercial, Eric did not find anything dissatisfactory except for the mediocre creativity. Moreover, the creative aspect of the commercial was not Michael Bay's area of responsibility. When the lights came on, Emily, who was sitting next to Eric, was most concerned about Victoria's Secret. She could not wait to ask, "Eric, what do you think?" Eric looked at Michael Bay, who was sitting on the other side of Emily and looking like he was all ears. He nodded and said, "The color, editing, and soundtrack are all very good. If it was just a 5-minute TV commercial, this film would be enough. However, this commercial as a whole lacks creativity. The 1.5-minute commercial is just a series of stiff accumulation of a series of sexy elements. I can't find any focus at all." Emily said, "We're just going to cut the TV commercial. However, Eric, do you have any ideas?" Eric shrugged and said, "You can look for an advertising company and slowly choose one. I don't have more time to help you with this. However, think about those big-name commercials that have lasted for a long time. You'll know how important creativity is. So, you'd better pay attention to it." Emily was a little unwilling, but she also knew that she could not ask for too much. Eric had already created a huge and influential Victoria's Secret commercial for Victoria's Secret. It was impossible for him to waste too much energy in this area. So she leaned back and formally introduced, "Eric, this is Michael Bay." Michael Bay quickly took the initiative to stand up and extend his hand to Eric. "Mr. Williams, it's a pleasure to meet you." Eric stood up and shook hands with Michael Bay. He smiled and said, "The camera technique in the commercial just now was very good." Emily said that you will take over this year's Victoria's Secret fashion show. She hopes that you can create another impressive underwear show. "I'll do my best, Mr. Williams." After saying this, everyone got up and left the viewing room. They walked through the long corridor, intending to go to the conference room on the other side. Michael Bay followed the crowd and looked at Eric, who was whispering to Emily, Edward Razek, and the others in front. He was a little disappointed, thinking that this opportunity had passed. But after a while, he saw Eric turn his head and wave at him. So, he quickly walked forward. "There's nothing else for us to do now. Follow me." After Eric finished speaking, he did not follow Emily and the others to the conference room. Instead, he turned to the stairs and went straight downstairs. Michael Bay didn't know what was going on for a moment. He stood there in a daze for a moment until Edward Razek patted him on the shoulder with an envious look. Only then did he realize what was going on. Surprised, he followed without hesitation. After several years of development, in addition to the overly large studio area, the office areas such as the Digital Domain Studio, the Cinema City Administrative District, and the Post-Production Center had been surrounded by trees. Eric left the Post-Production Center with Michael Bay and walked leisurely along the forest toward the Administrative District. From time to time, he nodded to the staff who greeted him. Michael Bay took a small step and followed Eric closely. He knew nothing about Eric's character. Although he wanted to show off, if Eric did not take the initiative to speak, he did not dare to say anything. He just secretly looked at the young man who had suddenly risen in Hollywood in recent years. Although he was a few years younger than himself, Michael Bay could clearly feel that Eric had a calmness that did not match his age. He knew that this was definitely not an illusion, but he could not find any reason to explain it. He could only attribute it to the natural halo brought about by power and wealth. The unreachable Hollywood director in his previous life was now following him like a follower. As a person of two lives, and after so many years, the impetuousness when he had just risen had disappeared. Eric did not have too much superficial sense of vanity. He just sighed inexplicably. As they approached the administrative building, Eric finally said to Michael Bay, Emily said that you have won many awards in music, MTV, and commercial production. I also watched your commercial just now. You put a lot of effort into it. So, if you want to make a movie, your foundation must be enough. Michael Bay did not expect everything to be so easy. He almost jumped up in excitement, but he immediately realized that Eric had not finished his words. He gathered his thoughts and continued to listen. Eric smiled and said, "You must be waiting for, but, right?" Michael Bay grinned and agreed. Eric said, "There is no but there is one thing. For last year's Victoria's Secret fashion show, I spent more than half a year personally planning it. The foundation has been laid, so the production of this year's Victoria's Secret fashion show will be much easier. But I hope you can spend at least 3 months on it. Mr. Williams, I promise, I will never let you down. Just call me Eric. It feels weird to hear people who are older than me call me that in such a serious manner." He walked into the administrative building and came to his office. Eric's secretary in the studio saw him come back. She handed him a file and said, "Mr. Williams, Mr. Bruckheimer just sent this over." Eric took the file and pushed the door open. He did not go to the desk, but sat down on the sofa in the reception area. He motioned to Michael Bay to make himself at home and said, "What would you like to drink? Ask Gina to make it." Michael Bay had just sat down. When he saw the secretary looking at him, he stood up slightly and said politely, "Coffee, just coffee." The secretary nodded and walked out. She did not ask Eric anything. Obviously, she knew his personal habits. Eric opened the file. Inside were the scripts for Brave Island and Jedi Cop. He handed the script for Jedi Cop to Michael Bay. Eric opened the script for Brave Island. Michael Bay did not know what Eric meant, but he still opened the script and read it carefully. After more than 10 minutes, Eric roughly read the script for Brave Island. He glanced at Michael Bay. If the script could be delayed for a year and handed over to Michael Bay, the original director, it would be a good idea. But in order to make up for next year's summer break, this plan had to be put on hold. Sensing that Eric had stopped reading, Michael Bay looked up and sorted out the content of the script. He planned to deal with Eric's possible questions. Eric pressed the script for Brave Island on his knees and asked Michael Bay, "What do you think of this story?" Michael Bay thought that Eric was also reading the copy of the script for Jedi Cop. He nodded and said, "It combines the crime elements of Lethal Weapon and the comedy style of Beverly Hills Detective. It's very exciting. It will definitely be a very good film. In that case, I'll ask Gina to make a copy of this script for you. Take it back and study it. I'll contact you in 2 days to discuss the establishment of the crew." When Michael Bay heard these words, his mind buzzed. After confirming that he had heard correctly, he asked in disbelief, "Wait, Eric, are you saying that you want me to direct this film?" "Yes, or do you think that you still need to continue to gain experience in the advertising industry?" Michael Bay quickly shook his head and subconsciously tightened his grip on the script in his hand. No, Eric, I don't need any more experience. I can take this job." Although he felt that Eric's decision was a little hasty, Michael Bay would never take the initiative to question it. Instead, he agreed decisively. Eric smiled and said, "That's it then. However, I have to remind you of 2 things. First, as I said earlier, you need to make 3 months for the Victoria's Secret show. Therefore, you need to complete this film before August." There were still 7 months left. Michael Bay recalled the plot of the script he had just read. There were not too many big scenes or special effects, so he nodded and said, "No problem. You must think that my decision is a little hasty, or even reckless, right?" "No, absolutely not. It's okay if you really think so." However, the second thing you have to remember is that as long as the quality of the film is good, the film will be released on Thanksgiving. In addition, Jerry and I will personally be the producers. We all care about our reputation. If you mess it up, you can only continue to shoot advertisements. Michael Bay's heart trembled. The excitement he had just now completely cooled down. He originally thought that Eric's decision was a little childish, but after hearing these words, he realized that the script in his hand was definitely a project that Firefly attached great importance to. Otherwise, the two big names, Eric and Jerry Bruckheimer, would not personally be the producers, nor would they release the film on the popular Thanksgiving. If the film was messed up, the media would only rush criticism to the two big-name producers. However, as a rookie film director, he would not be able to survive in Hollywood anymore. Eric looked at Michael Bay, whose expression changed, and said, "How about it? Do you still dare to take this job?" Michael Bay wanted to think about it for a few days, but he realized that this kind of hesitation would only disappoint the young Hollywood mogul in front of him. He hesitated for a moment, then nodded decisively and said, "Eric, I'll take it." "Very good." Eric nodded with satisfaction and said, "There is one more thing that you can rest assured. If there are problems with the film in the future, the responsibility will not be on you. Jerry and I will not vent our anger on you, so, you just need to do your best." This endorsement made Michael Bay, who was nervous, suddenly relax a lot. He quickly nodded and said yes. Half an hour later, Michael Bay left the administrative building of the studio. Walking in the forest of the studio, he felt the film script in his hand. The excitement of the opportunity suddenly surged in his heart again. The more he thought about it, the happier he became. For a moment, Michael Bay completely ignored the increasing number of pedestrians on the road as it was approaching the end of the working day. He clenched his fist and laughed a few times. He took a few quick steps and jumped up to make a shooting pose. However, he still could not help but grin, so he left the main road and rushed to the lawn in the studio. He took out the Motorola mobile phone from his waist and dialed a number in his address book without caring who was on the other side. As soon as he heard the voice on the other side, he said loudly, "Hey man, can you guess what I just encountered? I got the script, the movie script. I'm going to shoot the movie soon. Eric Williams personally handed the script to me." "Oh, Eric Williams, the one in Jurassic Park. Haha, I'm going to, sorry, really sorry, no, I don't buy insurance, no, I don't buy car insurance either." You're tuning in to the Narrate and Escape YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.